Hi everyone, if you enjoyed this video please subscribe. If you haven't subscribed yet, I'd love to see you join me. And don't forget to like and let me know what you think in the comments. They called me Jake Rains back in Tuvan Fall, though some of my buddies from the res just called me Rainy. That summer, I was working as a smoke jumper out of Aspen Creek, Colorado. It was brutal, dangerous work, but the pay was good, and honestly, the constant adrenaline was a decent way to outrun the ghosts I didn't want to face. The season had been eerily quiet until the call came about a fire near the Wyoming border. Lightning strike, they said, had torched a patch of dry timber in the Black Ridge National Forest. Remote area, chopper access only. The fire was already ripping, fueled by hot, relentless winds. We geared up, double-checked our chutes, and piled into the Huey. The ride was a teeth-rattling symphony of engine roar. Staring out the window, the wilderness sprawled beneath us, a massive green and brown quilt, already stained with plumes of smoke rising from the fire's hungry mouth. We jumped at dusk. The sky was a bruised purple and orange, bleeding into night. I hit the ground hard, the jolt slamming through my spine as my chute billowed and collapsed. Quickly shedding the harness, I grabbed my gear and hauled ass towards the fire line. Smoke choked the air, thick and greasy. Heat slammed into me, stealing my breath. We worked through the night, carving fire breaks, felling trees like dominoes, and drowning the flames where we could. It was a losing game. The fire was a living thing, growing faster than we could bleed it dry. Dawn finally clawed its way over the horizon, bringing a fresh crew to relieve us. Exhausted, black with soot, I stumbled back towards our makeshift camp, craving coffee that tasted like something other than ash. That's when I saw it. A flicker of movement in the trees, maybe 100 yards out. A silhouette, warped and twisted by the smoke haze. I squinted, trying to make sense of it. Too big for a deer. The way it moved unnatural, fluid. Instinct screamed at me. I snatched my binoculars, focusing on the tree line. What sharpened into view chilled me to the marrow. It was a creature, humanoid in shape, but coated in a dense, bristly pelt of dark hair. Its eyes burned like twin embers in the smoke, filled air, and its mouth God. Its mouth was a mess of jagged, needle-point teeth. It moved with a disturbing silence, that burning gaze locked directly on our camp. I yelled, adrenaline spiking again, but this time it was pure fear. No, move. We scrambled, grabbing our gear, stumbling back towards the LZ. Radio crackled to life. Our voices tight with panic as we called for immediate pickup. Time stretched, each second a raw nerve. Those red eyes bored into us from the edge of the trees, unblinking, predatory. Then, blessedly, the thud of rotors growing louder. The Huey materialized out of the smoke, a roaring, shaking promise of escape. We piled in, not daring to look back. As we lifted off, I risked one last glance down. The creature was gone, but the image of those glowing eyes was burned into my brain. Back at base, we reported what we'd seen. Blank stares, disbelief. They patted us on the back, told us it was smoke and exhaustion playing tricks. Imagination running wild. But I knew what I'd seen. It was something ancient, something wrong, something not of this world. The fire raged for another week, chewing through thousands of acres of forest. They finally contained it, but the land was scarred. Maybe forever. I quit smoke jumping soon after. Couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of something lurking just beyond the edge of the light. I drifted, restless, then finally moved back to the reservation, seeking some kind of peace in the old ways, the familiar rituals. Tried to bury the memory of that day in Black Ridge, but it wouldn't stay down. It festered, a poisonous wound in my mind, infecting my dreams and bleeding into my waking hours. One night, I was sitting by the fire, listening to the elders tell stories of the old days, when a news report on the radio snagged my attention. Hikers missing in Black Ridge, campsite abandoned, authorities suspected foul play. My blood turned to ice. The description of the area, it was the same sector as the fire, the same place. A cold dread washed over me, heavier than any smoke. I knew, with a sickening certainty, what had happened to those hikers. They'd stumbled into the same darkness I had. I had to go back, not just to face my own fear, but to warn anyone else who might wander into that cursed place. I packed my gear, said a strained goodbye to my family, and started the long drive. I reached the trailhead as the sun was sinking, painting the sky in fire and shadow. Hiked in as twilight bled into full dark, the only sound my own boots crunching on the forest floor. Found the abandoned campsite, scattered gear, the cold remnants of a last meal. A bad feeling settled deep in my gut. I pushed on, following a faint, overgrown trail that led deeper into the woods. The air turned colder, the shadows stretched long and hungry. I could feel it then. The creature's presence, a palpable weight of darkness seeping into my bones, raising the hair on my neck. Rounded a bend in the trail, and there it was, face to face, even more monstrous than I remembered, eyes burning like hot coals, teeth bared in a silent, chilling snarl. Fear clamped down, paralyzing me. The creature lunged, claws extended, ripping through the air. I reacted on pure instinct, dodging, rolling, scrambling back to my feet. Ran, blind, desperate flight. Didn't dare look back, but I could hear it. Heavy footfalls pounding behind me, closing the distance, tripped. Fell hard, my head cracking against a rock. Dazed, bleeding, I lay there, waiting for the end. The creature loomed over me, those eyes fixed, burning. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the killing blow, but it never came. I opened my eyes, slowly, fearfully. The creature was still there, but its gaze was shifted, focused on something behind me. I turned my head. A group of hikers, led by a park ranger, emerging from the trees. The creature snarled, a low, guttural sound that vibrated in my chest and melted back into the shadows. The hikers rushed over, helping me up, their faces etched with concern. I tried to warn them, to explain what I'd seen, what was out there. They just exchanged worried glances, chalked it up to wilderness delirium. I left Black Ridge that night, defeated, hollowed out. Returned to the res, a ghost of my former self. Never spoke of the creature again. But I knew, it was still out there, in the deep woods, waiting. The hikers were never found, disappeared without a trace. Their vanishing remains a cold case, a mystery. But I know the truth. They became victims of the same ancient evil I'd faced. An evil that still haunts the Black Ridge National Forest, and maybe always will. They call me Jaxt, or they used to, back when names mattered. Out here in the sticks of West Virginia, it's just me. A billion trees whispering secrets I don't want to know, and the occasional coyote serenade under a sky that's more stars than black. I ghosted out to this busted ass cabin back in 18, fresh off a one-way trip to Nope, Easton, trying to outrun the sand and the screaming. This place, this dead quiet, was supposed to be my hard reset. Turns out, peace is a damn comedian with a seriously messed up punchline. It started subtle, like a glitch in the Matrix. Porch swing decides to get chatty when the air's dead still. Shadows doing the tango at the wood's edge. Just a low-grade creep show, like a hangnail that's infected your soul. Then, bam, one sunset sky on fire, all electric orange and zombie purple, a voice ripped through the quiet like a chainsaw through butter. Deep, dude, tectonic plates grinding deep. Not human, not even close, and breathing down my neck. It vomited out words that sounded older than dirt, a language that made my teeth itch. My hand locked onto my Mossberg, my OG war buddy. Cold steel. Familiar comfort against my Kalaus trigger finger. The voice just glitched out. Silence again. But my neck hairs were still standing at attention, doing the Macarena. Next few days, the weirdo meter went full Chernobyl. Voice came back. Yeah, sometimes a whisper that felt like spiders crawling in your ear. Sometimes a bellow that shook the damn cabin. Always in that tongue that tasted like ash and regret. Then the pounding. Heavy, rhythmic thump, thump, thump against the walls. Like Godzilla was trying to RSVP to my cabin party. Sleep, luxury item, no longer available. Shadows started throwing raves with the firelight. Every creak of the cabin turned into a monster auditioning for the role of thing that eats jacks. One night, cold enough to freeze the balls off a brass monkey, snow coming down in sheets, a crash blew me out of my cot like a cannon shot. Living room window MIA, glass confetti all over the floor, reflecting the firelight like a million tiny, broken promises. And standing in the window, shaped Holvit, silhouette barely there against the blizzard backdrop. Tall, vaguely humanoid, but twisted man. Seriously twisted. Head like a melted candle, stretched out and wrong. Limbs like they belong to a different species, too long, too spindly. Skin, sicker than pale, almost see-through, like cheap plastic wrap. And the eyes, oh, those eyes, if you could even call them that, glowing with this unnatural, sulfur yellow light, like swamp gas and bad intentions. Nothing human, nothing animal. Nothing I'd ever seen outside of a seriously messed up fever dream. Nightmare fuel, straight up. Fear, cold and primal, punched me in the gut. Brain went offline. Just pure, unadulterated react. Boom. Mossberg barked, spitting buckshot. The roar tore through the dead, quiet night. The thing staggered back, a black, oily stain blooming on its chest like a goddamn flower of evil. But it didn't drop. Nope. Instead, it unleashed this shriek that went straight to my marrow, a sound that clawed at my sanity, tried to rip it out by the roots. Right then, I knew. Outmatched. Outgunned. Out of my damn league. This wasn't a bear, wasn't a mountain lion, wasn't even a rabid raccoon. This thing was other. Born from the whispers of the wind, the shadows of these hills that were old when time was still learning to walk. Skinwalker. The campfire boogeyman, the legend you laugh off until it's standing in your living room, rearranging your face. Adrenaline dump. Got a bail survival mod engage. Grabbed the go bag. Mossberg, ammo blade, canteen, beans. Wasn't gonna roll over and play dead. But I knew when I was beat. This wasn't my happy place anymore. It was its playground now. Slipped out the back. Snow crunching like bones under my boots. The skinwalker's banshee wail chased me, a twisted opera in the frozen wilderness. Stumbled through the trees, heart hammering a death metal solo, cold gnawing at my bones. Knew this wood's like my own nest up ahead, but the dark and the fear were the real ambush predators. The thing was hunting me, no doubt. Those glow stick eyes burned through the dark, tracking me like a heat-seeking missile, playing with me, the sicko, cat and mouse. Except the cat was a Lovecraftian nightmare, and the mouse was armed with a shotgun and a whole lot of nope. Then, a flicker of light through the trees, salvation, the old logging road, my escape route. Hope flared up, stupid and bright, pushed harder, lungs burning like napalm, legs screaming for mercy. Broke onto the road, and hallelujah headlights. Pickup truck, bouncing closer. Ranger freaking Joe. Old timer from down the road, another survivor from another war. Waved like a drowning man. Voice already shredded from screaming. Joe slammed on the brakes, face carved with worry lines deep enough to get lost in. I practically swan, dived into the passenger seat, sucking air like it was going out of style. Joe didn't ask, just mashed the gas. Rearview mirror, showtime. The skinwalker busted out of the tree line, pale as death against the moon, glare snow. Stood there, silhouetted, watching us peel out, then just vanished. Poof, back into the shadows. Joe drove, silent as a tome, knuckles whiter than the snow outside. He saw it. He saw the flat-out terror in my eyes, the invisible wounds I couldn't hide. Got to his cabin. He poured me a shot of whiskey that could strip paint. Liquid fire down my throat. What in God's name was that, Jax? Joe rasped, voice thin as paper. Stared into the fire, flames licking at the logs like hungry tongues. Skinwalker, I said, voice rough as sandpaper. Shape shifter. Real Joe. Freaking real. Joe just stared at me for a long minute, then nodded, slow and heavy. Believe it, Jax. Heard the whispers. Seen things this land, man, it's got teeth. Some things you just don't mess with. Crashed at Joe's for a few days. Human company. A warm blanket against the icy dread that had wrapped around me. But hiding wasn't the answer. Had to go back. Had to face it. Face the thing that had turned my sanctuary into a slaughterhouse. Heavy heart, said goodbye to Joe, hiked back to the cabin. Boarded windows tighter, door reinforced like Fort Knox. Mossberg glued to my hand. Set traps that probably wouldn't stop a squirrel. Scrawled words from some dusty ass book that might as well have been written in crayon. Prayed to gods I wasn't even sure existed. The skinwalker stayed gone. Nights were long, haunted by shadow monsters in my head, but I held my ground. Learned to breathe with the fear. To let the shadows be my roommates. The wilderness had handed me a brutal lesson, yeah, but it had also forged something new inside me, something hard and sharp. One morning, sipping coffee on the porch, sunrise painting the sky in gold and blood red, I saw it. Pile of bones at the edge of the clearing, bleached bone white by the sun. Human bones, no doubt. Arranged in this sick joke of a human shape. Knew then the skinwalker was still out there. Always out there, watching, waiting. But I knew something else too. I wasn't the hunted anymore. I was the hunter now. Guardian of this messed up sanctuary. Protector of this land that didn't want protecting. I'd face the skinwalker again, when the time came. And I wouldn't flinch. Because I'd learned fear wasn't the dead end. It was just the damn beginning. A twisted kind of handshake with the wildness that swallowed you whole. My name is Dale, and what happened to me back on July 14, 2015, still chills me to the bone. I had just retired and bought a secluded cabin deep in the Redwood Creek preserve of Northern California. Traded the city chaos for the whisper of redwoods and the lonely cry of eagles' peace. That's what I craved. Simple living. That day, the heat was brutal. Cicadas screamed in the trees, a relentless, buzzing soundtrack to the sweltering afternoon. I'd spent the morning wrestling with my small vegetable garden, sweat stinging my eyes as I fought weeds and coaxed water into the dry earth. Finally, I retreated to the porch shade, a sweating glass of iced tea in hand. As the sun started to dip, stretching long shadows across the clearing, I heard it. A sound I didn't recognize. A rhythmic thud, like something heavy being dragged through the undergrowth. I put down my tea, stood up, and squinted into the dense woods. The sound grew louder, closer, then abruptly stopped. Silence slammed down heavy and thick, broken only by the insistent drone of insects. I strained my eyes, trying to see through the deep shadows, but there was nothing. Shrugging it off, I figured it was a deer. Maybe a bear rooting around for grubs. I went back to my tea, but our knees prickled at the back of my neck. The next morning, I walked out to my garden and stopped dead, ruined. My carefully tended patch was utterly destroyed. Tomato plants ripped from the ground, squash vines trampled flat, even the thick corn stalks snapped and twisted. I knelt, tracing the damage with my fingers. Then I saw the tracks. They were enormous, unlike anything I'd ever seen. Deeply imprinted in the soft soil, three-toed, with claw marks that could have shredded steel, let alone flesh. A cold dread seeped into me. That sound from yesterday, it hadn't been any ordinary animal. This was something else. Something dangerous. Panic clenched my gut. I bolted back to the cabin, slamming the door and jamming the flimsy bolt. Windows were barricaded with furniture. My old Remington shotgun loaded and propped by the door. The sun sank, and darkness swallowed the cabin. I paced the wooden floor. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside, amplified in the silence. Then, a crash. The sickening sound of splintering wood echoed through the cabin. I spun around, shotgun raised, heart hammering against my ribs. The back door, once solid, now hung by a single, groaning hinge. Framed in the doorway, a silhouette against the faint moonlight, was a creature of immense size and power. It filled the opening, blotting out the night. It moved with terrifying speed, stepping into the cabin. Thick, dark fur covered it, matted and coarse. Its arms were long, corded with muscle, ending in claws that gleamed like obsidian in the dim light. The head was massive, a wide, flat skull, and a snout crammed with rows of jagged teeth. Its eyes small, deep-set, and burning with a cold, malevolent light. I fired the shotgun. The blast roared through the cabin, momentarily blinding me. When my vision cleared, the creature was gone. The door gaped open. A black maw in the darkness. I ran to it, peering out into the night. Nothing. But I could hear it moving through the woods. The sound of branches snapping and leaves crunching under its weight, moving away, but there. The next morning, the clearing held another horror. The mangled corpse of a deer lay near the cabin, flesh ripped open, blood staining the grass. It had returned, and it was hungry. I knew I was out of time. I wasn't safe here. I threw some essentials into a backpack, grabbed my shotgun, and started walking. Nearest town, Willow Creek, was a day's hike, but I had to risk it. I couldn't stay in the cabin any longer. It was out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting. I pushed through the dense forest, every nerve screaming. Movement flickered at the edge of my vision, twigs snapped behind me. But each time I spun around, there was nothing. It was playing with me, toying with its prey. As the sun began to bleed orange through the trees, I reached a small clearing. In the distance, the lights of Willow Creek twinkled like fallen stars. Relief flooded me. I'd made it. But as I stepped into the clearing, a shadow fell over me. I looked up, and there it was. Silhouetted against the dying sun, the creature was immense. Its eyes burned with a hatred I couldn't comprehend. I raised my shotgun, but I knew, deep down, it was useless. This wasn't just an animal. This was something ancient, something evil. It lunged, and then everything went black. When I woke, the sun was already high, burning through the trees. I lay sprawled on the cold earth, head throbbing, a dull ache radiating from my left shoulder. Trying to sit up sent a jolt of sharp pain through my side, forcing me back down. That's when I saw the blood. My shirt was ripped and deep. Ragged claw marks scored my ribs. I stumbled to my feet, the world swaying around me. The clearing was empty, the creature gone. I don't know how I survived, but I knew I couldn't stay. I staggered towards Willow Creek, pain spiking with every step. When I finally reached the edge of town, I collapsed by the side of the road. A passing driver found me, called for help. The next thing I knew, I was in a hospital bed, hooked up to machines, surrounded by doctors. My injuries were severe, but I would live. Lucky, the doctors said. Lucky to survive a bear attack, they said. They didn't believe my story about the creature, the tracks, the destroyed garden. Delirium, they called it. The ramblings of an old man alone in the woods too long. I was released from the hospital weeks later, but I never truly recovered. The scars on my body healed, but the scars in my mind, they stayed. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, that it was still out there, lurking in the shadows. I moved to a cramped apartment in town, far from the woods, far from the Redwood Creek Preserve. I tried to rebuild my life, but it was impossible. Sleep became a battlefield of nightmares, the creature's burning eyes seared into my brain. I started drinking, trying to drown the fear, the pain. It only made things worse. I lost my job, pushed away my friends, and eventually, my daughter, Sarah, gave up on me. She couldn't understand, thought I was losing my mind. I tried to tell people what I'd seen, but they just laughed, shook their heads, patted me on the back. Just a bear, Dale, they'd say. You need to get some help. But I know what I saw. It wasn't a bear. It was something else. Something evil. Something that still haunts my dreams. Something that lurks in the shadows, waiting for another chance to strike. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls through Willow Creek, I swear I can still hear that rhythmic thud in the distance, getting closer. The year was 1995, and I was finally embarking on that cross-country road trip I had always dreamed of, though definitely not under the circumstances I'd imagined. My name's Ethan, by the way. Just a few months earlier, my world had imploded. My wife, Sarah, died in a car crash, completely out of nowhere. It left me reeling, struggling to figure out what the hell to do with my life. My brother, Liam, suggested I get away for a while, clear my head. He offered up his old VW van and his company, and honestly, I figured it couldn't hurt. Maybe a change of scenery would help me make sense of things. We decided to head out towards the California coast. Yosemite sounded like a good target, We planned to work our way north, hitting up all the national parks along the way. First stop, Yosemite National Park. Majestic granite cliffs, giant sequoia trees, and those powerful waterfalls. Perfect if you're trying to wrestle with your troubles, I guess. On our first day, we stuck to the main trails in Yosemite Valley, just taking in the iconic views. Later, we decided to stretch our legs on one of the trails leading up from the valley floor, the Mist Trail to Vernal Fall and Nevada Fall. The hike started out pretty busy, lots of people heading up to the waterfalls. But as we climbed higher, the crowds thinned out. The trail wound alongside the Merced River, the roar of the water a constant soundtrack. It felt good to breathe in the fresh, pine-scented air, to feel my body working again. Liam's always been the social butterfly, cracking jokes every other second. Me, I'm happy in my own head. So, I let him chat with other hikers while I lagged behind, lost in thought. The thing about grief is it ambushes you when you least expect it. One moment, I was almost enjoying the hike. The next, a wave of it slammed into me, so intense I had to stop. The memory of Sarah, her laugh. The way she used to look at me, it was so clear, so vivid. It felt like I might actually choke. When I could breathe again, Liam was out of sight. Liam. Hey, wait up. No answer, just the rush of the waterfall and the wind in the trees. Figuring I'd catch up with him soon, I kept walking. The trail climbed steeply, switchbacking up the rocky slope. That's when I saw it blood. A large splatter, dark red against the granite steps. A jolt of cold fear twisted in my gut. Liam. I shouted again, louder this time. Still nothing. There was no mistaking it, something was wrong. Following the trail of splatters, I saw more blood, and then, snagged on a jagged rock, a piece of torn fabric. Liam's flannel shirt. He always wore these ridiculous flannels. This one was red and black plaid. My heart started hammering in my chest. I scrambled up the trail, fear lending me a strange kind of speed. Then the trees opened up, and the trail reached a viewpoint overlooking Nevada Fall. And I saw him. Or what was left of him. He was lying face down near the edge, overlooking the valley. His body, the damage was horrific. Something had torn him apart, ripped him open. Panic clawed at my throat. I spun around, desperate to find any escape route, any sign of what could have done this. Whatever it was, it had to be close. Then I saw movement. A flash of dark for disappearing behind a cluster of boulders. It was big, bigger than any bear or mountain lion I'd ever seen. As it turned, I caught a glimpse of its eyes, glowing with an unnatural red light in the shadows. The creature paused, as if sizing me up. Then it lowered its head and let out a low, menacing growl that vibrated through the ground. I wasn't sticking around to see what it could do. I don't know how I ran as fast as I did, but I scrambled back the way I'd come, tripping, tearing my hands on the rocks and roots. The creature was fast. I could hear its heavy paws pounding on the trail behind me. I burst back onto the main section of the Mist Trail, yelling for help at the top of my lungs. Half blind with terror, I sprinted down towards the crowds of hikers near Vernal Fall. Help! Someone help! There's something. It attacked my brother. People stopped, stared, confused, and a little scared. But when I turned back and pointed, everyone saw it. The monstrous creature emerged from the trees, landing on the trail in front of the stunned hikers. It was easily 7 feet tall, covered in thick, dark fur, almost black in the shadows. Its face wasn't animal, not really. The snout was long, almost canine, but the teeth rows and rows of sharp, jagged teeth, like something from a nightmare. People screamed and scattered. One guy, brave or stupid, tried to throw his water bottle at it. The creature swiped a clawed hand. The claws had to be over 6 inches long, and sent him flying. The creature lunged forward, a blur of dark fur and snapping jaws. And then, an explosion of noise, the smell of gunpowder. A park ranger, running towards us, rifle held steady. He fired again, and the creature snarled, stumbling backward. Blood stained its dark fur. It glared at the ranger, then turned and bolted with surprising speed back into the woods. The ranger sprinted to where the hiker had been knocked down. I followed, nausea churning in my stomach. The man wasn't moving. There was so much blood, tears stung my eyes, so much death in one day. My knees buckled, and I sank to the paved trail, waves of shock and grief washing over me. Park rangers and paramedics arrived, then the police. They took statements, roped off the area. But even amidst the chaos, I couldn't shake the image of the creature, or the echoing sound of those gunshots. That thing wasn't natural, not anything I'd ever read about. They never found Liam's remains. The official explanation was a bear attack, or maybe a mountain lion, something gone wrong. I never bought that story. I know what I saw, and I know the truth. Lime didn't just die out there. He was murdered by something monstrous. Alright, so a few years back, my buddy Ben and I decided to hit up Blackwood Forest. It's supposed to circle Silent Peak, this dormant volcano out in California. You know, all those documentaries about volcanoes blowing their tops. Well, Silent Peak is right in that kind of zone, even if it's been quiet for ages. Figured it'd be a change from the usual beach trips, you know. I'm Alex, by the way. Almost forgot to introduce myself. So, first day out there, I'm getting major creepy vibes. Blackwood Forest was empty, like, eerie empty. No birds chirping, no squirrels scampering, nothing. Just silence. Ben and I tried to tell ourselves it was early in the season. Maybe animals were still hiding out. Who knows? We'd been hiking for hours, the trail winding deeper into the woods, when I stumbled on this weird clearing right at the base of Silent Peak. The ground was all ash and rock, nothing growing, and it was perfectly circular. Too perfect for nature, you know. Something about it just made my skin crawl. Ben, he looked a bit green around the gills himself. We both got this feeling, like, yeah, let's just keep moving. That night, we camped in this hollow a couple of miles further on. It was one of those clear, still nights where every little sound gets amplified. And let me tell you, there was way more going on out there than we thought. Cracking branches, rustling leaves, stuff moving in the undergrowth. At one point, we heard this chittering sound, low and raspy. Not like any animal I've ever heard. I hunt back home in Montana, so I know my animal calls, and this wasn't right. Ben and I just laid low in our sleeping bags, didn't even risk a fire. Not gonna lie, it wasn't the best night's sleep I've ever had. Morning came, and naturally, we had to go back and check out that clearing. This time, there was something new. Tracks. Huge tracks. Like, Bigfoot huge. But this is where it got freaky. 3 toes. Long, mean-looking claws. And the stride. Almost twice the length of a grown man's foot. Ben and I looked at each other, and I could tell we were thinking the same thing. There ain't no grizzly or cougar on earth that makes a track like that. We're good hikers, but we ain't dumb. Whatever was out there was big, and it wasn't something we wanted to meet up close. We grabbed our packs and started hiking back towards the trailhead, fast as we could. Ben was a few steps ahead of me when he just stopped dead, like he'd run into a brick wall. I almost bumped into him, and then I saw what spooked him. Across the trail were more of those tracks. Only this time they were fresh, like still wet and muddy fresh. Holy crap, Alex, Ben whispered, face white as a sheet. Just then we heard it again, that chittering sound, but closer. Whatever was making that noise, it was following us. We panicked, I'll admit it. Started booking it down the trail, not caring about how much noise we were making. Branches slapped our faces, rocks kicked up dust, and all the while, I'm thinking, maybe it's a good thing those things leave big footprints. Makes them easier to track, right? Every few steps, I glanced back, expecting to see some hulking beast burst out of the trees. But nothing. Whatever it was toying with us, staying just out of sight. Then, as we were rounding a bend, Ben tripped, went sprawling. And that's when we saw it. Not even 20 feet away, crouched on a rocky outcrop. Tall, skinny like some walking nightmare on two legs. Skin was pale gray, stretched tight over its bones. And its head, it didn't have a proper face. Just all smooth, with long, slitty black eyes that seemed to see right through you. It let out this sound, like a hiss and a growl all mixed up together, and lunged. Now, I may be a city boy these days, but I grew up with guns, and luckily, I still had my pistol strapped on. I didn't even think, just drew and fired. 2, 3 shots rang out, echoing around the canyon. The thing jerked back, let out a screech that set my teeth on edge. Then it scrambled up the rocks with impossible speed, disappearing into the trees. We didn't stop running until we burst out of the woods and into the parking lot. The rangers gave us a real funny look when we stumbled out, clothes torn, eyes wide as saucers. Don't think they believed our story. Heck, maybe we just imagined the whole thing, some trick of the wilderness. But those tracks, and that feeling of being watched, Ben, and I don't talk about it much. But a while ago, I saw this news report about a hiker gone missing from the very same area. Makes me wonder, maybe we weren't so crazy after all. Maybe some things are better left alone, hidden in those deep wild places. It was last November when I ventured off on a solo hunting trip deep into the Blackwood Forest. I'm not exactly a city slicker, but I usually stick to marked trails. This time, though, I was determined to bag a real trophy buck, even if it meant hiking for days. My buddy Jake was supposed to join, but his wife was expecting their first baby any day then, and family comes first. The first day was a bust, just squirrels, and the occasional deer disappearing into the brush, white tails flashing. Finally, on the second day, just as the sun started to dip behind the mountains, I saw it. A massive buck. I mean, massive. It wasn't just the antlers. The whole animal was huge for a whitetail. I shouldered my rifle, sight locked on, and then it moved. Not like a normal deer. More upright, with a weird, loping stride. Then it turned, and that's when I knew something was seriously wrong. Its head, the eyes weren't deer eyes. They were too close together, too high on the skull. The muzzle was long, way too long, and its lip curled back, showing teeth that no plant eater should have. Worst of all, there was something about its posture. like a person trying to walk on all fours, but not quite getting it right. It was mostly bipedal. I didn't fire. I couldn't. Something deep down screamed that this wasn't an animal. It was something else. My mind raced. Werewolf. No, that's just crazy. Werewolves aren't real, or are they? I froze, staring as that thing studied me right back, with an unsettling stillness. It let out a low, rumbling growl that vibrated through me. That snapped me out of whatever trance I was in, and I ran. Didn't even think about direction, just bolted through the trees. Branches whipped my face, thorns tore at my clothes. I could hear it crashing behind me, those long strides eating up the distance. I had a head start, but damn if it wasn't closing in fast. Then, my foot caught on a root, and I went sprawling. My rifle skittered off into the darkness, pain shot up my leg, and I scrambled back, eyes wild, searching for that monster deer, wolf in the gloom. I reached out, hands scrabbling for my gun. Just out of reach, but at least I could see the damn thing coming at me now. Except it wasn't there. I sat there, panting, heart hammering. Had I outrun it? No way, impossible. I craned my neck, listening. No crashing, lumbering footsteps. Nothing. The forest was dead silent except for my own ragged breathing. Slowly, I got up, legs shaky. My rifle was inches from my fingers. I snatched it up, then limped slowly towards where I thought the logging road should be. The thing could be anywhere, but I knew being out in the open was suicide. There was a small, old hunting cabin near the road, maybe half a mile up. I'd stumbled across it last year, abandoned but solid enough. If I could make it there, maybe I could hunker down for the night. I crept forward, flinching at every twig snap. It was pitch black now, and I only dared use my phone's weak flashlight when I absolutely had to. Finally, after what felt like forever, I spotted the faint glimmer of the logging road. The cabin wouldn't be much further. My adrenaline-fueled body wouldn't let me feel the full force of the pain yet, so I managed to hobble to the cabin. The old door groaned open with a rusty cry, and I squeezed inside, slamming and bolting it shut behind me. Inside, it was dusty and smelled of old wood, but it was sturdy. No glass left in the windows, just boarded up holes, which was fine by me. I found a battered oil lamp, lit it, and then started rummaging for supplies. Turns out, whoever used this place last was as messy as I am. Old food wrappers, clothes wadded up in corners, and bingo, a battered first aid kit under the rickety cot. I bandaged up my cuts and took some extra strength painkillers, figuring I'd either need them later or wouldn't be awake much longer anyway. It was a long shot, but I also managed to pry up a loose floorboard by the back wall. If that deer, wolf thing ripped through the front, this might be a last-ditch escape option. Small comfort though. My hand shook, and I knew I wouldn't get much sleep. I must have dozed off at some point, because I bolted awake, every nerve screaming, to the sound of something raking its claws across the outside wall. It circled the cabin, growling, and then there was an awful slamming sound against the door. The whole cabin rattled in its frame. I huddled on the cot, rifle clutched in sweaty hands, watching the old boards of the door quiver. How long until they gave out? Then, an idea hit my fire. The old wood was dry, and if I could start a good blaze, maybe it would drive off whatever it was. I had a lighter, and there was a pile of kindling tucked by the dead fireplace. My hand shook as I fumbled with the lighter, spilling fuel in my haste. The scrabbling outside briefly stopped. replaced by a low, guttural growl that echoed right through me. It was getting smarter. I had to hurry. Finally, a spark caught, and soon the kindling was ablaze. I shoved the burning wood under the larger logs, praying for them to catch, and backed away to watch. The flickering orange light illuminated the small cabin, and I could see deep gouges in the wood outside, where the creature had been tearing at it. My heart sped up. How long could the old wood resist? Suddenly, a horrible stench filled the room, so full I almost retched. There was a crash against the boarded up window, and I spun towards it just in time to see a muzzle pushing through a splintered gap. Its long, grey tongue snaked into the cabin, saliva dripping from its teeth. I fired. That close I couldn't miss. The shot blasted through the window, and a sharp, pained howl split the air. The window frame flew apart, leaving a jagged, open hole, but the creature was gone. I stumbled back, hands fumbling to reload, as that stench worsened. Then I saw it, crouched low behind the cabin, its wounded flank towards me. The fire must have driven it out, and now the whole cabin was a tinderbox waiting to burn. Cursing, I grabbed the battered oil lamp and held it aloft. It was a desperate, stupid move that could have blown me to hell, but maybe, just maybe, I bolted for the open window, yelling like a madman, and as I hurled the lamp straight at the creature's exposed backside, the oil shattered and fire splattered across its coarse, matted fur. It went up like a torch, screaming with a sound unlike any animal I had ever heard. It thrashed and flailed, a ball of flames in the darkness, before stumbling off back into the thick woods. I stood there, breath rasping in my chest, waiting. But aside from the crackling of my hastily built bonfire in the cabin, and the distant howl of the creature dwindling into silence, the forest was still. I slumped to the floor. It was over. Well, maybe over. I stayed there until dawn, too terrified to move a muscle. Even as the flames slowly died down, with the first rays of sunlight, I forced myself up with an aching groan. I bandaged my wounds as best I could and gathered what few supplies were left in the cabin. As I ventured back out into the morning light, I scanned the woods warily. No sign of the creature. Nothing but scorched earth and snapped branches where it had fled. My rifle lay abandoned near the logging road, and after a tense search, I retrieved it. The walk back out of the woods was a blur. Every rustle of leaves had me flinching, expecting those terrifying eyes, that distorted muzzle, to burst from the trees. When I finally reached my truck, I felt like I'd aged 10 years. I threw myself in, slammed the door, and fumbled for the keys. They weren't in my pocket. With a jolt, I remembered leaving them on the rickety table in that damned cabin. Had I even locked the door before I left? I wouldn't know until I went back. Maybe the creature was gone. Maybe it wasn't. I didn't go back. Instead, I put the truck in gear and drove. Drove until I put a good state or two between me and that nightmare in the woods. That was months ago now. Since then, I've seen therapists, tried to make sense of it all. Wildlife experts shrug. The internet turns up nothing that even comes close to resembling what I saw out there. Most days, I can almost convince myself it was just a freak bear or a mountain lion on some bad drugs. But at night, lying alone in the dark, I hear the crackle of kindling, smell that rotting stench, and see those eyes gleaming in the shadows. Some local hunters told me a few weeks ago about an enormous, half-burned animal carcass they found out in the woods. Said they'd never seen anything like it. Whatever it was, they left it to rot. I like to think it was the creature that died out there, alone. Mostly, I like to think that. But every once in a while, especially when the woods start whispering in the back of my mind, I wonder if there's a name for the thing that hunts in Blackwood Forest. I think the old Appalachian folks might have had a name for it. Something passed down through generations in whispers. Something like the Wendigo. I don't want to know for sure. Overnight shifts. The kind of hours most sane people run from. Guess that tells you something right there. I'm not exactly wired like everyone else. Name's Alex, and for the last couple of years, I've been a security guard at the Crestwood Heritage Museum, here in Havenwood. Not one of those flashy places packed with dinosaur skeletons and selfie-snapping crowds. Nah, this is the old school kind. Dusty, full of back rooms and storage nobody ever seems to visit. Pace is slow, yeah, but the quiet, that's what I'm after. See, I've got this thing. Hyper-hearing is the best way to describe it. Daytime, living inside a beehive. Evenings are manageable, but nights, when the city goes silent, that's when I really tune in. Mice behind the walls, crickets outside, even with the windows sealed shut. The low thrum of the freezers in the reptile wing, clear across the building. Mostly annoying, sometimes useful. And most nights, it's just the soundtrack to my endless rounds and bad reality TV flickering on the lobby monitor. Then, last Tuesday happened. Started with a rhythm. Coming from the Southwestern Artifacts exhibit. You know, the one: Navajo rugs, Hopi pottery, all that touristy stuff locals mostly ignore. This rhythm wasn't a heartbeat, wasn't footsteps, more like tapping. Soft, insistent. Like it was coming from inside one of the glass display cases. Security guard for long enough, you become a natural skeptic. Probably a busted thermostat, weird vent, something mundane. But regulations are regulations. I grabbed my flashlight. Radioed Marcus up at the front desk, probably halfway to dreamland already. Hey Marcus, heading over to Southwestern Artifacts. Hear something weird. Marcus has this permanent scowl etched on his face, cracks a smile about as often as he wins the lottery. Just grunted into the radio, which, on the Marcus excitement scale, registers as a full-blown 5-alarm fire. The tapping got faster as I got closer. Skin prickled. That primal part of my brain screaming that something was wrong. The case was in the center of the room, spotlights blazing down. Nothing inside seemed to be moving. Beam of my flashlight bounced off old jewelry, clay figurines, the usual artifacts. Still, that rhythmic tapping. Hesitant step closer. And I swear to God, the lights flickered. Just once, like a power stutter. Enough. My gut clenched. Stupid curiosity finally took a back seat to self-preservation. Halfway to the radio when a sound stopped me cold. Low scratching rasp. From inside the case. Okay, now we were way past weird. Faulty speakers. Elaborate prank for some dumb web video. Hand hovered over the radio. Calling Marcus felt dumb. What was he going to do? Roll his eyes and tell me it was nothing. But this felt bigger. Above my pay grade. Maybe even above the cops. Mouth went dry. Shape started to resolve in the display case. Crouched low amongst the pottery. Thin, hunched, and somehow impossibly small to be making that much noise. Smooth, hairless skin gleamed pale in the dim light. Had a head, I think, but hunched like that, all I saw was a curve of spine and two long limbs. Then it twitched. Mine short-circuited. Its hand. God, I wish I had another word for it. All knobby joints and elongated fingers. Like a spider's legs, blown up to human size. Fingers ended in these curved, black claws. And those were what were making the tapping sound against the glass. Stomach heaved, trying to claw its way out of my throat. This is the part of the story where a normal person runs, right? Calls for backup. My problem. Not exactly normal. Stubborn. Got to see it for myself type. Fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. Heavy, awkward, but better than nothing. The creature, the thing in the case, seemed oblivious to me. Focus entirely on its claws, tapping, scraping, with a relentless, sickening rhythm. Crept closer. Extinguisher held high, took a breath, swung. Extinguisher exploded against the glass with a satisfying smash. Creature shrieked. High-pitched whistling sound that set my teeth on edge. Scuttled back, claws flailing defensively. And for a heart-stopping second, it was fully visible. Naked, hairless, with a distended stomach, ribs showing through like it was starving. Limbs were stick-thin, impossibly long, ending in those horrific hands. But the head, that's what'll haunt my dreams. Bulbous, smooth. Tinnious slits for nostrils, wide gaping mouth full of jagged teeth. Hissed, scrambling sideways like a crab as I shattered the rest of the case. Now, a halfway sane person would have run. Marcus and the cops were minutes away, and this thing, while freaky, didn't look like it could outrun anyone. But something snapped in me. Rage, maybe. Or just the stupid part of my brain that always overrules the survival instinct. Before I knew it, I was on top of the shattered glass, wrestling with something that felt like snakeskin and wet bone. It snapped, clawed. That awful whistling shriek echoing in the enclosed space. Held it at arm's length, fingers sinking uselessly into its slick skin. Those awful black claws scrabbling for my face. Then, dumb luck. Its hand caught on a jagged piece of the display case, slicing one of its spindly fingers clean off. Remember thinking how pale its blood was, barely visible in the dim light. Creature made a sound then, almost like a sob, and bolted, not towards me, deeper into the exhibit. Marcus chose that exact moment to barge in, flashlight flailing. Alex, what the hell? Legs gave out. Staggered to my feet, clutching my bleeding hand where the thing had scratched me. It had vanished, swallowed by the shadows in the back of the exhibit, but I knew it was still there. Watching cops came, swarm of them. Sealed off the museum, did their CSI sweep. Took my statement so many times I got tongue-tied. Of course, they found nothing. Not much of a surprise. No creature, no signs of forced entry. Wrote it off as a break-in messed up vandalism. Fired me, of course. Museum insurance didn't cover supernatural attacks. Apparently. Been a month now. Nightmares haven't stopped. Sometimes lying awake, I swear I hear that tapping again. Scratching against glass. Just out of sight. Marcus, bless his soul, he believed me. Quit his job the next day. Says he's heard stuff about that southwestern exhibit. Old stories from when the museum first acquired the pieces back in the 60s. Whispers about Navajo skinwalkers. Ancient spirits trapped in the artifacts. Sounds crazy, right? But I saw what I saw. Worst part is, no one else believes us. Makes me start to question myself sometimes. World keeps turning. Folks go about their day, and the city sleeps while something hides in the shadows, just beyond our sight. Museum reopened. Busted display replaced. And I swear, driving past the other night, I saw a figure crouched inside, tapping methodically on the glass. Slammed on the brakes, got out. But by the time I reached the ethnology wing, the case was empty. Some things, maybe they're better left unseen. Maybe I'm better off not knowing if I was crazy that night, or if there are worse horrors out there than we can imagine. But one thing's for sure. I'll never look at a museum exhibit the same way again. It used to be my escape, visiting Aunt Agnes and Martha out at their old cabin. It was light years away from my cramped city apartment and the endless drain of Zoom meetings. Something about the quiet, the way your eyes adjusted to real darkness at night, it always reset me. Plus, Agnes baked a killer peach cobbler. But this visit was different. Aunt Agnes had fallen down a rabbit hole of some online conspiracy forum. She'd gone from warm cobbler to cold rants about chemtrails and how the government was spying on us through squirrels. I figured it was just the isolation getting to her. But things took a turn when she started talking about protecting herself. "Thee got eyes in the woods, babe," she warned me over dinner, her eyes a little too bright. "Thee've been sending messages, leaving things for me." I gave a nervous chuckle. "Messages? Like what, auntie? Acorns and stuff." She just glared. And there was no cobbler for me that night. The next morning, I was determined to shake her out of it. Maybe a brisk walk on her back acreage would do the trick. Bad idea. Horror movie opening bad idea. First, there were the dolls. Not cute porcelain dolls, but ragged things made of old clothes, buttons for eyes, hanging by their necks from the trees. A cold prickle went down my spine. "Auntie, what the heck is this?" I called out, but there was no answer. Then, I saw a glint of metal half buried in the dirt, a bear trap. Nope, worse. An old rusty machete smeared with dried blood. Animal blood, hopefully. My stomach lurched, and I wanted to get us out of there, fast. We stumbled on what Agnes called her coffering. It was a rotting deer carcass, tied to an old redwood, covered in weird symbols carved into the flesh. My gag reflex went into overdrive. "We're leaving right now," I said, my voice shaking. But as I turned back to the trail, I heard it, a growl from the tree line, low and guttural, not like any animal I knew. Suddenly, Agnes was beside me, clutching this ancient-looking shotgun, eyes wide with a manic glee. "See, babe. Told you they're real. Now we'll show them." Before she could even raise the thing, a shape burst from the shadows. It was huge, easily 7 feet tall, barreling towards us. I couldn't process it. Wiry limbs, a hunchback that was all lumps and ridges. A head like a wolf's but with way too many teeth, and this awful wet snorting sound coming from it. I just froze. Agnes, though, she didn't hesitate. She raised the shotgun and fired. The blast echoed through the trees, and for a second, I thought the thing might actually crumble. Then it just laughed, a sound like rocks scraping together, that sent shivers down my spine. The creature was closing in fast now, a blur of sinew and claws. "Jet to the cabin," Agnes yelled, shoving me towards the path. I took one last look at her, standing defiant against that inhuman monstrosity, before bolting like a scared rabbit. Back at the cabin, I fumbled for my phone, hands barely working. 9/11. That's what normal people did, right? But out here, who'd even respond in time? Maybe Agnes had other supplies I could use. Frantic, I tore through the cabin, finding old ammo boxes. And wait, was that dynamite? My brain scrambled, trying to connect the dots. The dolls, the blood, the symbols she'd lured this thing here. But why? Outside, I heard a gunshot, then a scream that cut off short, and then that unnatural, grinding laugh, getting closer. Crap, crap, crap. I grabbed the biggest kitchen knife I could find, a pathetic weapon, but better than nothing. I heard the front door crash open, then the creature's footsteps pounding through the cabin. I knew I had seconds, maybe less, before it tore me apart. Desperation sparked a twisted idea. I sprinted for the old wood stove, fumbling for the lighter and box of matches Agnes kept behind it. Behind me, I heard a shriek of rage, an unholy screech that vibrated through my bones. I threw open the stove door, shoved crumpled newspaper and kindling inside, and struck a match with trembling fingers. Just as the kindling began to catch, the thing emerged from the shadows. Its fur was matted and patchy, revealing scabby, leathery skin beneath. Its jaw was stretched in a grotesque grin, dripping with thick, black drool. I hurled the burning match into the stove and slammed the door shut. The creature roared in fury, clawing at the iron. Flames burst to life within, casting monstrous shadows against the wall. I stumbled backward, hid behind something solid, a cabinet, and ripped it open. A gallon jug of lighter fluid. My heart hammered. This was insane. This was suicide. But I was out of options. I splashed the fluid across the wall leading to the stove. The thing was shrieking now, the sound deafening. It pounded at the stove door, frantic to escape the growing inferno. I struck another match, hesitated for one terrifying second, then tossed it. The lighter fluid ignited instantly, a wall of flame cutting the room in half. The creature screeched again, writhing in the flames. I had to get out. I bolted towards the back door, fumbling for the knob. Then I heard the sound of sirens, faint but growing louder. Agnes must have called the cops before she went full on crazy, or maybe someone heard all the gunfire. I threw open the door and ran outside, gasping for fresh air as the cruisers screeched to a halt. I pointed towards the burning cabin, trying to find words. Monster thing inside my aunt. Then I collapsed on the grass, shaking like a leaf. It felt like forever before the firefighters hauled what was left of that creature from the ashes. It was barely recognizable as anything that had once been alive. The cops took my statement, their faces a mixture of shock, skepticism, and something that looked a lot like pity. The official story became a tragic accident, an elderly woman losing her grip on reality. A fire sparked out of control. The stuff about the deer carcass, the dolls, they figured it was all connected to Agnes's mental state. No one asked too many questions about how I survived. For a while, I was the talk of the county. The crazy aunt's niece who got away from the fire. I never corrected their version of events. What would I even say? That we were attacked by a forest demon. Yeah, that would have landed me in a padded room instead of my own apartment. But here's the thing. Those cops, the firefighters, the ones who saw the body, I think some of them knew something wasn't right. I saw it in their eyes, a flicker of unease they couldn't quite hide. And the whispers started. Rumors of other strange sightings deep in the woods. Hunters finding half-eaten animal carcasses. That one family who vanished while camping, never found. Now, I don't bake cobblers anymore. Don't even like being outside when it gets dark. But I don't go spreading my story around. No podcasts, no social media pleas for someone, anyone, to take me seriously. I figure staying quiet, staying normal, is my best survival strategy. Whatever those things in the woods are, I never want to cross paths with them again. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear that grinding laugh in my nightmares. And I wonder if maybe Agnes was right. Maybe the government isn't the only threat out there. Maybe there's a whole world of darkness hiding just out of sight. And maybe we're better off not knowing. My name is Alex Walker, and what happened to me on November 5th, 2015, still haunts my nights. I was living in a secluded cabin, deep within the Olympic National Forest in Washington state. Solitude was my preference. I'd always been a loner, finding peace in my own company and the vast wilderness surrounding me. Years had passed since I'd left the forest's embrace, and the news I caught on my old radio was usually days behind, but it was enough to keep me vaguely connected to the outside world. Life was simple, centered around the land. My days were spent tending a small garden, fishing in the nearby Sole Duck River, and making occasional trips to the small town of Forks for supplies. November in the Pacific Northwest is a time of damp transition. The towering redwood trees, while evergreen, were draped in a perpetual mist, and the forest floor was a carpet of wet leaves in shades of fading gold and brown. The air was heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth, and a constant drizzle was more common than sunshine. The days were cool, and the nights were biting cold. One evening, as I was preparing a simple dinner, an unsettling sound drifted in from the woods. It was a low, guttural snarl that vibrated through the cabin walls and sent a chill crawling up my spine. I froze, listening intently. The sound was unlike anything I'd ever encountered, a deep, resonant growl that seemed to echo through the ancient trees. I grabbed my trusty old Marlin 336 rifle and cautiously stepped out onto the porch. Twilight was deepening, casting long, distorted shadows across the small clearing around my cabin. The woods were eerily silent now, except for the distant rush of the river and the whisper of wind through the redwood canopy. I scanned the tree line, my senses on high alert, but saw nothing. Shrugging it off as an overactive imagination fueled by the solitude, I went back inside. But as the days turned into a week, strange occurrences became commonplace. I started finding animal carcasses scattered around my property, deer, raccoons, even a coyote, their bodies brutally mangled and partially devoured. The once vibrant wildlife seemed to have vanished, replaced by an unnerving silence that pressed in on me. One morning, I woke to a chilling discovery. Massive footprints were imprinted in the soft, rain-soaked earth just outside my cabin door. They were unlike any animal tracks I had ever seen. Each print was the size of a dinner plate, with 3 long, wickedly sharp claws clearly defined in the mud. These tracks were no bear, no cougar, nothing I recognized. They led directly into the dense forest, disappearing into the tangled undergrowth. I followed them for a while, my rifle held ready, my heart pounding against my ribs. But the trail soon faded, the rain washing away the already indistinct prints. A growing unease settled over me. The following night, the unsettling noises returned, closer this time and more persistent. It was accompanied by the unmistakable sound of heavy breathing and the sharp snap of twigs under immense weight. Peering through the window, my breath catching in my throat, I strained to see into the darkness. In the faint moonlight filtering through the trees, I could just make out a large, hulking shape moving through the woods. It was too dark to discern details, but I could tell it was massive, far larger than any bear or mountain lion I'd ever imagined. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through my initial disbelief. I knew, with a primal certainty, that I couldn't ignore this threat any longer. Grabbing my rifle and a powerful flashlight, I stepped out into the night. The creature was gone, vanished back into the dense forest. But the footprints remained, stark and undeniable in the beam of my flashlight, leading deeper into the woods. Driven by a mixture of fear and a desperate need to understand, I followed them. The trail led me to a small clearing I rarely visited, and there, in the center of the clearing, was a scene of grotesque carnage. The remains of a deer lay scattered across the forest floor, its body torn apart, its entrails strewn amongst the ferns and fallen leaves. The stench of blood and decay hung heavy in the damp air. As I stood there, surveying the horrifying scene, a sound behind me made me whirl around, rifle raised. The creature stood there, bathed in the pale moonlight filtering through the trees. It was massive, easily 8 feet tall, with a thick, corded musculature. Its fur was matted and dark, almost black, blending seamlessly with the shadows. Its head was large and elongated, with a snout filled with rows of sharp, jagged teeth that gleamed in the moonlight. But it was its eyes that truly terrified me. They glowed with an unnatural, menacing red light. Its claws were long, wickedly curved, and razor-sharp. The creature let out a low, rumbling growl, and I instinctively fired my rifle. The bullet struck its chest with a sickening thud, but it didn't even flinch. It lunged, impossibly fast for its size, its claws outstretched towards me. I dodged to the side, narrowly avoiding its deadly grasp. Firing again, I managed to hit it in the shoulder. The creature roared in pain, a sound that was more animalistic shriek than growl, but its attack didn't falter. Panic seized me. I turned and ran, my heart hammering against my ribs, adrenaline flooding my system. I could hear the creature crashing through the underbrush behind me, its enraged roars echoing through the trees. Knowing I couldn't outrun it in the open, I scrambled desperately up a nearby redwood, its rough bark tearing at my hands. The creature reached the base of the tree and began to climb, its claws digging deep into the thick bark, tearing away strips of redwood as it ascended with surprising agility. I scrambled higher, my hands shaking, fear lending me a desperate strength. I could hear it getting closer, the rasp of its claws on the bark, its hot, fetid breath on my ankles. Reaching for a higher branch, I stretched upwards, just as the creature's claws closed around my boot. It yanked downwards with brutal force, pulling me off balance. Its teeth sank into my leg with agonizing force. I screamed in raw pain, kicking and thrashing wildly, but it was no use. The creature dragged me down, its claws tearing at my flesh, ripping through my jeans and into my muscle. The pain became unbearable, and darkness swallowed me whole. When I awoke, I was lying on the forest floor, in a sticky pool of my own blood. The creature was gone, but the searing memory of its attack was burned into my mind, a brand of pure terror. Ignoring the throbbing agony in my leg, I somehow managed to crawl back to my cabin, collapsing onto the floor in a wave of exhaustion and pain. Hours blurred into a nightmarish haze. I lay there, the pain slowly, agonizingly subsiding, replaced by a dull, throbbing ache. I knew I couldn't stay there. The creature would be back, and I knew, deep down, that I wouldn't survive another encounter. Gathering what few belongings I could carry, ignoring the searing pain in my leg with each step, I stumbled out into the cold night. I had no destination in mind, only a desperate need to escape. As I walked, I couldn't stop thinking about the creature. What was it? Where did it come from? And why was it hunting me? The questions swirled in my mind, unanswered, terrifying. Eventually, days later, I made my way to Forks, the nearest town. There, I sought help from the local sheriff, a man named Harding. I told him my story, recounting every detail, the fear still fresh in my voice. He listened patiently, his expression unreadable. But when I finished, he shook his head, a look of wary skepticism in his eyes. He suggested I'd probably just encountered a bear, maybe a particularly aggressive one, and that my imagination had filled in the rest. I knew he was wrong, utterly and completely wrong. But there was nothing I could say or do to convince him. With no other options, I left Forks, hitchhiking my way towards Seattle, hoping to lose myself in the city and start a new life. But the memory of that night, of the creature, haunted me relentlessly. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of unseen eyes on me in the darkness. I started seeing the creature's eyes everywhere, glowing red pinpricks in the shadows, in the reflections of car headlights, in the depths of alleyways. I could hear its low growl in the rush of the city wind, its heavy breathing in the sudden silences of the night. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that I would never be the same again. The creature had taken something fundamental from me, something I could never reclaim. The carefree man who had lived in the woods was gone, replaced by a haunted shell, forever marked by the terror of that night. Then, one rainy night in Seattle, while walking down a dimly lit street, I saw a familiar figure lurking in a shadowed alleyway. It was the creature. Its eyes glowed an unmistakable red in the gloom. A low growl rumbled from its chest, and I knew, with a sickening lurch of my stomach, that it had found me. Panic surged through me. I turned and ran, my heart pounding, adrenaline spiking. I could hear the creature's heavy footsteps pounding the pavement behind me, getting closer with each stride. Knowing I couldn't outrun it in the open city streets, I ducked into the first open doorway I saw, an abandoned building, its windows boarded up, its interior swallowed by darkness. I plunged into the maze of rooms, hoping to lose it in the labyrinthine space. I could hear the creature moving through the building, its heavy footfalls echoing in the silence, its claws scraping against the concrete floor. I held my breath, pressing myself against a cold, damp wall, trying to become invisible, trying to silence the frantic hammering of my heart. But it was getting closer. Its growls, deeper and more menacing now, echoed through the empty rooms, guiding it unerringly towards me. I rounded a corner, desperate to find another escape route, and found myself face to face with the creature. It lunged, impossibly fast, its claws outstretched, aimed at my face. I dodged to the side, stumbling backwards, narrowly avoiding its deadly strike. My back slammed against a wall, trapping me. The creature advanced, its red eyes burning with a malevolent light. I knew this was it. This was the end. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the inevitable, for the searing pain, for the darkness to claim me completely. But then, through the ringing silence, I heard a deafening gunshot. The creature let out an ear-splitting shriek of pain, a sound that tore through the night, and stumbled back. its massive body momentarily faltering. I opened my eyes, blinking against the sudden light, and saw a figure standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the streetlights, a smoking gun held firmly in his hand. It was Harding, Sheriff Harding from Forks. He had followed me all the way to Seattle, finally, impossibly, convinced of the truth of my story. "Should have listened to you, son," he said, his voice shaking slightly but firm. "Should have believed you." He fired another shot, and the creature let out a final, agonizing roar before collapsing to the ground in a lifeless heap. I stood there, my body trembling uncontrollably, my mind reeling, struggling to process what had just happened. I had survived, but at what cost? The creature was dead, finally, definitively dead. But the scars it had left on my soul, on my very being, would never fully heal. I knew I would never truly forget the terror of that night in the woods, the feeling of its claws tearing into my flesh, the sound of its roars echoing through the ancient trees. Harding helped me to my feet, his hand surprisingly gentle on my shoulder. Together, we left the abandoned building and stepped back out into the rainy Seattle night. As we walked, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see the creature rise again, to see those red eyes burning in the darkness. But it was gone. Its reign of terror, at least for me, was finally over. What was it? I asked Harding, my voice hoarse, barely a whisper. He shook his head, his face grim. "I don't know, Alex. Don't rightly know. But I've never seen anything like it before in all my years." We walked in silence for a while, the only sound the soft patter of rain and our footsteps echoing on the empty sidewalk. "What are you going to do now?" Harding asked, breaking the silence. I shrugged, the weight of exhaustion and trauma settling heavily on me. "I don't know. I just want to forget all of this." Harding stopped walking, turning to face me. "You can't forget, Alex," he said, his voice firm but kind. "You'll never forget. But you can move on. You can start a new life." I looked at him, a tiny spark of something like hope flickering within the darkness. "Maybe you're right," I said, the words barely audible. "Maybe I can." Harding offered me a place to stay at his house back in Forks, an offer I gratefully accepted. The small town felt different now, quieter, somehow more comforting than the overwhelming city. The people seemed friendlier, their faces etched with concern rather than suspicion. They had heard my story, or at least a version of it, and they knew, somehow, that I had been through something terrible. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Slowly, tentatively, I started to piece my life back together. I found a job at a local auto repair shop, working with my hands, finding a small measure of solace in the mechanical world. I even started to write again, the raw, visceral memories of my experience in the forest fueling a strange, dark creativity. But the memory of the creature never truly faded. It lingered in the back of my mind, a constant, shadowy presence, a reminder of the darkness that existed just beyond the edges of civilization, just beyond the comforting glow of streetlights and human company. I often found myself staring into the woods surrounding Forks, half expecting to see those glowing red eyes peering back at me from the shadows. Harding and I became close friends, bound by the shared trauma and the unspoken understanding of what we had faced. He was a good man, a true lawman, who had dedicated his life to protecting his community. He told me stories of his own experiences, tales of the strange and unexplained things he'd encountered over the years, missing hikers, unexplained livestock deaths, strange noises in the night woods. He believed, deeply, that there was more to the world than what we readily perceived, a hidden realm of shadows and secrets just beyond our grasp. One evening, Harding and I were sitting on his porch, watching the sunset paint the Olympic mountains in hues of orange and purple. The air was still, and the only sound was the gentle chirping of crickets. "You ever wonder what that thing really was?" I asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Harding took a slow sip of his beer, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "Got my theories," he said, his voice low and thoughtful. "Some folks around here whisper about skinwalkers, shifting creatures from Native American folklore. Others believe it's something darker, a demon maybe, a creature of pure evil. What do you believe?" I asked, turning to look at him. Harding shrugged, a gesture that spoke volumes. "I believe it's something we don't understand, Alex. Something ancient and powerful. Something that's been here long before us, and will likely be here long after we're gone." We sat in silence for a long moment, each lost in our own thoughts, the shadows lengthening around us. You think it'll come back?" I asked, the question hanging heavy in the twilight air. Harding turned to look at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and grim determination. "I don't know, son. But if it does, we'll be ready for it." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn leather-bound book. He handed it to me, and I opened it, my fingers tracing the aged leather. Inside were pages filled with handwritten notes, faded drawings, and cryptic sketches. It was a journal, a record of Harding's years, long investigation into the strange occurrences in the Olympic National Forest. "I've been keeping track of these things for years," Harding explained, his voice quiet. "I've talked to other folks, people who've had similar experiences. I believe there's a pattern here, something we can use to understand what we're dealing with." Looking at the journal in my hands, a new sense of purpose, however daunting, began to stir within me. "I want to help," I said, my voice stronger now, filled with a newfound resolve. Harding smiled, a rare, genuine smile that reached his weathered eyes. "I knew you would, Alex," he said, and so, we began our work. We spent countless hours poring over Harding's notes, researching local legends and folklore, and interviewing anyone who had encountered anything strange or unexplained in the forest. We learned about other attacks, other disappearances, whispers and rumors that had been dismissed as tall tales for generations. Slowly, painstakingly, we started to connect the dots, to see a terrifying pattern emerging. The creature, or creatures, seemed to be drawn to areas of intense natural energy, places where the boundary between the physical and the something elsey was thin. It was as if they fed on fear, on the raw, primal energy of those who dared to trespass into their ancient domain. We realized we weren't just dealing with a single rogue animal, but with something far more sinister, something older than the redwoods themselves, a race of ancient predators that had existed in the shadows for centuries, patiently waiting, watching, hunting. They were cunning, intelligent, and utterly ruthless, and we were now irrevocably their prey. One cold, moonless night, Harding and I were back in the woods, following a fresh set of tracks tracks far too large to be any known animal. We were armed to the teeth, rifles loaded, flashlights cutting through the oppressive darkness, ready for anything, or so we thought. The air was thick with tension, the silence broken only by the crunch of our boots on the forest floor and the frantic pounding of our own hearts. We came to a small, secluded clearing, a place of unnatural stillness, where the tracks abruptly stopped. We scanned the area, our rifles raised, our senses straining against the darkness. Then we saw it. The creature was standing in the center of the clearing, a hulking silhouette against the deeper blackness of the trees. Its eyes, twin points of malevolent red light, burned in the darkness, fixed on us. It was bigger than we remembered, its fur matted and stained with blood and grime, its teeth bared in a silent snore. A low, guttural growl rumbled from its chest, and we knew, with a chilling certainty, that the hunt was truly on. We raised our rifles, the metallic click of the safeties, disengaging, sounding deafeningly loud in the silence. We fired, the shots echoing through the ancient trees, shattering the stillness of the night. The creature roared in pain and rage, charging towards us with terrifying speed, its claws outstretched, tearing at the air. We fired again and again, the bullets tearing into its flesh, ripping through its matted fur. But it didn't stop. It kept coming, driven by a murderous rage, its red eyes burning with an unholy light. I knew, in that moment, staring into those glowing eyes, that this was it. This was the end. We were going to die here, in this forgotten clearing, swallowed by the darkness and the ancient predator we had dared to hunt. But then, something utterly unexpected happened. The creature suddenly faltered, its massive body convulsing violently. It let out a final, ear-splitting shriek, a sound of pure agony and rage, before collapsing to the ground with a heavy thud. Its body twisted and spasmed for a moment, then went still, dissolving into a grotesque, smoking pile of ash before our disbelieving eyes. We stood there, frozen, our rifles still raised, our hearts pounding like drums in our chests. We had done it. We had killed the creature, or so we desperately hoped. As we cautiously approached the smoking pile of ash, a chilling detail caught our attention. The creature's eyes. They were still glowing. The red light burned with an unnatural, malevolent intensity, even in the absence of the creature's physical form. And then, from the ground beneath our feet, from the very earth itself, we heard it. A low growl, deep and guttural. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. We looked at each other, our faces pale in the moonlight, a fresh wave of icy fear washing over us. We knew, with a chilling certainty that defied all logic and reason, what it meant. The creature was still alive, and it was waiting for us. The old hunting cabin was my dad's, tucked away deep in the Blackwood pines, way up north near Coldwater Lake. I was there for a solo bear hunt. Solo, except for Duke, my dad's old blue-tick hound. Duke's got more hunts under his collar than I do, so I figured he'd keep me out of trouble. Don't get me wrong, I'm no city slicker lost in the woods. I grew up with a rifle and a fishing rod in my hands. But there's something about bears, you know. They can switch from looking like cuddly goofballs to straight up predators in a heartbeat. Dad's cabin was remote, buried in thick pines, a good half-mile down a rutted dirt track off the main road. This track had a history, too. Locals whispered about a woman who vanished up there years back. They called her Willow Creek Wendy, some kind of recluse who lived off the land. Never found her. Some said a bear got her, others figured she just wandered off without a word. I'm not one for ghost stories, but that track always gave me the creeps. The first few days of the hunt were a wash. Duke picked up a couple of weak scents, but nothing we could really track. I was starting to think I'd be going home empty-handed, facing my dad's endless teasing. But the fourth night, things went sideways. I was frying up some bacon over the fire, Duke snoring at my feet when I heard it. Faint at first, like a dry branch snapping, but then louder. I know the sounds of the woods pretty well. This wasn't deer, squirrel, or even coyote. This was big. Duke's ears shot up, and he let out a low growl. I grabbed my rifle, that bare unease I always get now spiking in the back of my neck, but this felt different, colder. I told Duke to stay put, but he was having none of it. The fur on his back bristled like needles. I moved away from the firelight, trying to pierce the darkness. My eyes strained against the black, the pines looming like giants. Then I caught a flicker of movement right at the edge of the trees. At first, I thought maybe moose, but this thing was wrong. Too tall, too spindly. I raised my rifle, heart hammering like a drum solo. I wasn't going to shoot blind, but if it came any closer, suddenly, Duke exploded forward, barking like crazy, charging straight into the tree line. Stupid dog. What the hell was he thinking? I thumbed the safety off, ready to cover him. Then the thing stepped into the firelight for a split second, and I wish it hadn't. It wasn't a bear. Whatever those stories about Willow Creek Wendy said, they were dead wrong. This thing was easily 8 feet tall, arms too long and twiggy, skin gray like rotting meat. It shuffled forward, almost hunched, but even then, it towered over me. The worst part, though, was its eyes. They glowed, man. Not like animal eyes reflecting light, but glowing, like embers in the dark. Duke reached it, snarling and snapping at its legs. That's when it made the first sound I heard from it. Like a low hiss mixed with a rusty hing groaning. Then it lashed out. I'd heard bears were fast, but this thing moved like a damn ghost. It swatted Duke out of the air like he was a toy, his body slamming against the cabin wall. I heard a yelp, then silence. I froze, pure adrenaline flooding my veins. That ain't no animal. No way was that anything human either. But what in God's name was it? The thing took a step towards me, its glowing eyes locked on mine. Then another, and another. I knew I wasn't going to be fast enough to shoot, not if it moved like that. The safety was off on my rifle, but my mind was spinning. Run, stand my ground. Was I about to become another missing person in these woods? Then something shifted. The hissing stopped, its glowing eyes dimmed, and it tilted its head like it was confused. It took a step back, then turned and melted into the blackness. I stood there, frozen, for what felt like forever, rifle still raised. When I finally could move, I checked on Duke. He was breathing, but shallow. Blood was dripping down the cabin logs, and I saw a nasty claw mark raking down his side. He needed a vet fast. I built the fire back up, dragged Duke closer to the warmth. The old dog looked up at me with pain in his eyes, and I did my best to soothe him, but in the back of my mind, the image of that creature was burned in. First light, I was out of there, packed up, drove Duke straight to town. The vet patched him up, said he was lucky, said Duke was tough. Put up one hell of a fight for an old dog. I never hunted at Dad's cabin again, not without a whole crew of buddies anyway. Folks don't believe me when I tell them what I saw. Say I bumped my head, or the whiskey mixed with campfire smoke played tricks on me. Doesn't matter to them, but it matters to me. I just figure some things in this world are better left as mysteries. And those woods up by Coldwater Lake, they ain't meant for just any man. The afternoon sun dappled through the canopy of Redwood National Park, painting shifting patterns on the forest floor as I settled into my usual spot by the creek. Rod in hand, I breathed in the crisp, pine-scented air, letting the quiet seep into my bones. This place, nestled deep within the ancient redwoods, was my sanctuary, my escape from the relentless noise of city life. It wasn't often I could steal away to this pocket of tranquility, and I savored every moment. My name is Ethan Blackwood, and this secluded cabin had been my refuge for years. Lost in thought, I cast my line into the clear, cold water. The gentle murmur of the creek, the only sound besides the rustling leaves high above. Suddenly, the crunch of approaching footsteps broke the stillness. I glanced up, surprised to see a young couple emerge from the dense undergrowth. Looking slightly bewildered, they introduced themselves as Maya and Ben Carter. Hiking enthusiasts, they explained, but their trail map had led them astray. They were genuinely apologetic for trespassing, their curiosity piqued by the sight of my cabin in this remote location. I chuckled, sharing a few light-hearted tales of cabin life and the odd occurrences one sometimes encounters deep in the woods. Their laughter was infectious, and soon all three of us were doubled over, clutching our sides, tears streaming down our faces. "If you're truly lost," I offered once we'd regained our composure, "feel free to bunk in the cabin for the night. It's getting late to navigate back to the main trails." "Thank you, we wouldn't want to impose," Maya began, but Ben interjected. "That's incredibly generous of you, we really appreciate it." Maya nodded, smiling gratefully. As dusk painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, we shared a simple but satisfying meal, cooked over an open fire outside the cabin. Later, as the temperature dropped, we moved indoors. Ben helped me stack firewood by the hearth, while Maya, ever the tidy one, straightened up the small living space. The next morning dawned clear and bright. After a quick breakfast, we decided to hike together, hoping to guide Maya and Ben back to familiar trails deeper in the park. We set off, following winding paths through the towering redwoods, sunlight filtering through the immense trees in ethereal beams. Then, we stumbled upon it. A clearing bathed in an unnatural silence, broken branches scattered like discarded twigs, the air thick with a metallic tang. Blood, everywhere, it seemed, soaked into the earth, staining the fallen leaves, splattered across the tree trunks, and then the remains, disfigured, broken, strewn carelessly across the gruesome scene. Human remains. Maya and I gasped, recoiling in horror. Ben, his face ashen, turned away abruptly and vomited onto the forest floor. The gruesome tableau was sickening, beyond anything we could have imagined encountering. After a moment of stunned silence, we forced ourselves to survey the area more closely, trying to breathe shallowly through our mouths to avoid the cloying stench. Deep gouges scarred the bark of the massive redwoods, as if something immense and powerful had raked its claws down the ancient trees. And then we saw the massive, misshapen footprints pressed deep into the muddy earth, unlike any animal track we'd ever seen. Whispers of fear passed between us, unspoken questions hanging heavy in the air. What kind of creature was capable of such carnage? The idyllic forest had transformed into a scene of unimaginable brutality. Tension coiled tight within us as we began our hurried retreat back towards the cabin. Anxiety gnawed at me, a cold knot in my stomach. As we retraced our steps, a low, guttural growl echoed through the woods, chilling us to the bone. Instinct took over. "Run!" I yelled, shoving Maya and Ben forward, adrenaline surging through my veins as we sprinted blindly through the trees, desperate to escape whatever was stalking us. The forest, once serene, now felt menacing, the shadows deeper, the silence more oppressive. Maya stumbled, a sharp cry of pain escaping her lips as she went down hard, twisting her ankle beneath her. Tears welled in her eyes, and it was clear she'd done serious damage. "My ankle, I think it's sprained," she sobbed, clutching at it. Without hesitation, I scooped Maya up into my arms, while Ben supported her on the other side, her weight heavy between us as we hobbled forward, urgency fueling our desperate flight. The growls behind us seemed to grow closer, more insistent. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of terror-filled minutes, the familiar sight of my cabin came into view. We stumbled inside, slamming the door shut, fumbling to lock the deadbolt. Windows were latched, every possible entry point secured. I grabbed the 3 shotguns from my gun safe, loading them with trembling hands. We huddled together in the flickering lamplight, fear etched on our faces, the weight of our predicament pressing down on us. Doom felt inevitable. Then, a deafening siraish ripped through the cabin. Something immense slammed into the chimney with earth-shattering force, sending bricks tumbling down through the roof, showering us with dust and debris. Panic erupted. Our worst nightmares materialized as we glimpsed the creature outside. Coarse, matted fur covered a form unlike any animal I had ever seen. Razor-sharp claws, impossibly long, gouged deep furrows into the cabin walls as it clawed and scrabbled, trying to tear its way inside. Its eyes, burning with an unholy light, locked onto ours, an invitation to terror. And its roar a sound that resonated deep in my bones. A primal bellow that spoke of unimaginable hunger. Its teeth, like jagged daggers, flashed in the dim light, impossibly large. Terrifyingly real. We were trapped, outgunned, outmatched. I fumbled for my cell phone, my hands shaking so violently I could barely dial. "Why aren't you calling for help?" Ben hissed, his voice tight with fear. "I'm trying," I exclaimed, finally connecting to emergency services. My voice trembled as I frantically explained our desperate situation to the operator, who, bless her, assured me help was on its way. But help felt impossibly far away. With each passing moment, the inhuman growls and the relentless assault on the cabin intensified, a living nightmare unfolding around us. We knew it wouldn't be long before the creature breached our fragile sanctuary. "We have to barricade the door," Maya gasped, her voice strained. "Anything we can find." It was a desperate, last-ditch effort, but it was all we had. We scrambled, shoving furniture against the heavy wooden door, the old oak table, the sturdy armchair, anything we could move. A sliver of hope flickered amidst the terror, the hope that we could buy ourselves precious minutes, maybe enough time for help to arrive. But even as we braced the furniture against the door, another earth-shattering crunch echoed through the cabin. The monstrous creature had punched a gaping hole through the side wall. Its massive head lunged through the opening, snapping and snarling. Blood, soaked for dripping onto the wooden floor. We recoiled in terror, backing away as far as we could, trapped in the corner of the cabin. "Do something," Ben pleaded, his eyes wide with panic. I nodded, adrenaline surging through me. There was no other choice. Fight or die. I grabbed one of the shotguns, the cold steel a small comfort in my trembling hands. Hesitantly, I raised it, aiming at the beast's grotesque head, praying, desperately hoping, to somehow subdue it, to protect Maya and Ben, to survive this nightmare. Just as I was about to pull the trigger, a blaze of flashing lights erupted outside the cabin, cutting through the darkness. Our prayers, it seemed, had been answered. A team of heavily armed officers emerged from the forest, their figures silhouetted against the flashing lights of their vehicles. They approached the struggling beast with a determined precision that sent a wave of relief washing over me. Simultaneous gunshots cracked through the night. The creature recoiled, a monstrous bellow of pain echoing through the woods, but it didn't relent its furious assault. The officers, unwavering, continued to fire. Finally, as a last resort, I saw one officer raise a different weapon, a dart gun. A soft thump followed, and almost immediately, the creature's movements slowed, its roars fading into groans. With a final, shuddering sigh, the monstrous form slumped to the ground, unconscious. Deafening silence descended upon the cabin, broken only by our ragged breaths. Relief, profound and overwhelming, washed over us. Maya clung to Ben, both of them pale and shaken, their eyes wide with the lingering horror of the encounter. We stumbled out of the cabin, weak, kneed but alive, and thanked the officers profusely, their swift response nothing short of miraculous. They assured us the creature would be transported to a secure facility, its origins investigated. "We'll keep you updated on our findings," one officer promised, his voice calm and reassuring. "Don't worry. It won't hurt anyone else." In the days that followed, we began the slow process of healing. We tended to Maya's sprained ankle, patched up the gaping hole in my cabin, and started to mend the invisible wounds etched onto our minds. Ben, surprisingly, proved to be incredibly helpful with the repairs, a quiet strength emerging from him in the aftermath of the terror. A strange bond had formed between us, forged in the crucible of that nightmarish encounter. As we waited anxiously for news from law enforcement about the creature's origins, my mind kept replaying those horrific events. The razor's edge we'd walked, how close we'd come to succumbing to that creature's bloodlust. But one thing remained undeniably clear. Together, we had faced the unimaginable, and somehow we had survived. City life was suffocating me. The constant noise, the crowds, it was all too much. That's why I signed a lease on a cabin nestled deep in the Redwood National Park in California. The town of Havenwood was small, quiet, exactly what I needed. The cabin was secluded, tucked away in the ancient redwoods, just far enough from civilization to escape the relentless urban drone, but not so remote I felt completely cut off. My name is Alex Ramsey, and this cabin was going to be my sanctuary, a place to de-stress and reconnect with myself. The first week was blissfully uneventful. Days were spent hiking among the towering trees, breathing in the crisp, pine-scented air and losing myself in the breathtaking beauty of the park. It wasn't long before I met my nearest neighbor, an old-timer named Jedediah Blackwood, who lived about a mile down the trail. Jedediah, or Jed as he preferred, had lived in these woods his entire life. Every time we met, he'd entertain me with these wild, colorful tales of the area, mostly about the strange history of Havenwood and the even stranger folks who used to call these woods home. One afternoon, as we sat around a crackling fire outside Jed's weathered cabin, he told me a particularly grim story from about 10 years back. It involved a woman named Sarah Jenkins, a resident who vanished without a trace. After 4 days, search parties found her body, deep in the woods. Jed said it was gruesome, mutilated, they called it. The official cause of death: unknown predator. I chuckled, dismissing it as local folklore, something cooked up to spook city dwellers like me. The next few weeks passed peacefully. I settled into the rhythm of woodland life as summer really took hold. But as the days grew longer, the nights started to get unsettling. Strange sounds began to fill the darkness: rustling leaves, snapping twigs, and these low, guttural growls that echoed through the cool night air. Still skeptical, I chopped it up to wildlife, or maybe just Jed's stories playing tricks on my mind. Then, one day, it happened. The unthinkable. Another horrific discovery. A group of hikers stumbled upon the remains of not one, but 3 people. Each body was mangled, horrifically disfigured. Panic ripped through Havenwood. Fear became the new air we breathed. Curiosity, or maybe morbid fascination, drove me to trace the locations of both incidents on a map. A chilling realization hit me like a punch to the gut. My cabin was smack dab in the middle of them. A sickening feeling washed over me as I tried to process what could possibly be responsible for such brutality. In the days that followed, Jed became insistent on copping our defenses. As he put it, he was convinced whatever had done this was still out there and might strike again. He took me under his wing, showing me how to set snares, how to handle a rifle, skills I never imagined I'd need. Despite my initial reluctance, I couldn't deny a growing sense of unease, and I was grateful for his gruff mentorship. One evening, Jed and I were sharing a couple of cold beers on his porch when a blood-curdling scream tore through the twilight. The sheer terror in that sound was unmistakable. We exchanged a horrified look and bolted towards the direction of the scream, hearts pounding in our chests. What we found near a small cottage further down the trail was straight out of a nightmare. A young woman named Emily Carter, who lived in the cottage, lay in a pool of blood in her front yard. It looked something had attacked her mid-stride with savage, merciless force. Deep claw marks raked across her body, and her limbs were twisted at unnatural angles. Jed dropped to his knees, his weathered face grim as he checked for a pulse. He shook his head slowly. She was gone. A faint rustle in the bushes nearby snapped our heads up. Something was watching us from the shadows. It was huge, towering on 2 legs like a man, but distorted wrong. Its limbs were elongated, ending in claws that looked capable of tearing through steel, let alone flesh. Its face was a grotesque mask, hidden beneath thick, matted fur stained a horrifying crimson. With Emily's broken body at my feet, and the monstrous creature lurking just yards away, the full weight of our situation crashed down on me. This thing was real. It was responsible for everything. My blood ran cold. As our eyes locked with the beast's, Jed reacted instantly. A deafening roar ripped through the air as he fired his shotgun. The blast hit the creature, making it stumble back, but it didn't fall. It let out an unearthly shriek, a sound that clawed at my sanity, before vanishing back into the dense woods. Jed stared at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and adrenaline. "We got a call for help," he rasped. I sprinted back to my cabin, needing to put some distance between myself and it. My lungs burned, and my hands trembled as I fumbled for my cell phone and dialed 911. As I stammered out the story to the operator, fear and adrenaline coursed through me. But the nearest help was too far away. We were on our own. We barricaded ourselves in Jed's cabin. As we rushed inside, he shoved a heavy hunting rifle into my hands. "Might be all we got," he muttered grimly. He started boarding up the windows, reinforcing the door with anything we could find. Night fell, thick and heavy. We barely spoke, both of us straining to hear any sound that might signal the beast's return. Exhaustion was a dull ache, but sleep was impossible. The wind whispered through the trees, and our own breathing seemed deafening in the suffocating silence, amplified by the terror that gripped us. We spent the next few days huddled in the relative safety of the cabin, taking turns on watch, trying to rest, knowing it was out there, somewhere waiting. As days blurred into nights, Jed revealed he'd managed to contact some old contacts, guys who knew about wilderness survival, tracking, dealing with problem animals, he'd called it. They were on their way, bringing supplies and heavier firepower. When they arrived 2 days later, we filled them in on everything: the creature's description, the attack on Emily. Their faces were grim, set with determination. They outlined a plan to track the beast down, insisting Jed and I stay behind for our own safety. I argued at first, but Jed, his voice firm, said we lacked the experience, the training. He was right. Before they left, the leader of the trackers, a weathered, grizzled man named Silas, pressed a worn pocket knife into my hand. "Ain't much against something like that," he said, his voice low and serious, "but it might be enough to keep you alive if it comes back." Days turned into weeks. We waited, agonizingly, for news. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping branch sent a fresh jolt of fear through us. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Silas and his team returned. They were exhausted, scratched and bruised, but they had done it. They'd found the creature's lair, deep in a hidden ravine, and they'd dealt with it. Silas explained it wasn't anything they recognized, some kind of mutated hybrid, they figured. Apparently, it wasn't naturally aggressive towards humans, but something had triggered it, given it a taste for blood. Once that happened, hunting became its only focus. We said our goodbyes to Silas and his team, overwhelmed with gratitude for their courage and what they'd done for us, for Havenwood. We also took a moment at Emily's makeshift grave, a small mound of earth marked with wild flowers, to honor her memory, determined that her death wouldn't be just another forgotten tragedy in these woods. Slowly, life started to return to something resembling normal for Jed and me. We were changed, marked by the terror we'd faced, the knowledge that death had stalked us in our peaceful woods. But there was a sense of relief, too, knowing the creature was gone. We remained vigilant, though inseparable now. Jed continued to teach me about wilderness survival, about self-defense. Because even if that particular monster was gone, there could always be others, lurking just around the bend, waiting in the shadows of the ancient redwoods. My name is Alex, and my buddy Mark, and I used to joke that my life was just a never-ending loop of boring routines, until everything went sideways in Blackwood Forest. What happened there, it's like a brand burned into my memory, and I can't shake the need to tell it, hoping maybe it'll give me some peace, or stop someone else from making the same dumb choices. Blackwood Forest, near Asheville, North Carolina, had just exploded with life after a ton of rain. I was holed up in this tiny cabin I rented, trying to escape the city noise and stress. The air was crisp, and everything was ridiculously green. It was like flipping a switch from the usual dry, dusty landscape we'd had for weeks. Every day, I'd hit the trails, newly marked and all, or mess around with my camera, trying to get shots of the birds and bugs waking up. This photography thing wasn't just killing time, it was therapy. It helped me push back all the crap I'd been dealing with, and for the first time in ages, I felt quiet inside. One afternoon, I wandered off trail and found this clearing deep in the woods. In the middle was this tree that looked ancient, gnarly branches everywhere, hiding most of the trunk. It was twisted up like something out of a nightmare, and the leaves were hanging on for dear life, all sparse and sad. But the weirdest thing was this nasty, sore smell coming from it. Made my nose wrinkle up bad. Then Sarah, a neighbor from another cabin, joined me on a hike a few days later. She was obsessed with plants and animals around here, always ready with some crazy story about them. She could make listening to her feel like you were right in the middle of some epic adventure novel. So, we're walking this trail, just another regular day, when we stumble on this freaky sight: claw marks, deep and mean, gouged into a bunch of trees. Sarah, who's hunted before and knows her wildlife, was totally stumped. We shrugged it off, kept walking, but this weird feeling stuck with me. It was like every step was dragging us closer to something we really didn't want to meet, something lurking just out of sight. Night started closing in fast, and this heavy dread just swallowed us whole. Then we saw them animal remains, ripped apart, scattered all over the trail. It was sickening. We tried to tell ourselves it was just some animal that got carried away hunting, but we were lying, even to ourselves. We stood there, shaking, listening to this eerie quiet, just owls hooting way off and frogs croaking. Then, this growl, low and mean, ripped through the woods. Nothing like any animal sound I'd ever heard. Heart hammering, adrenaline spiking, we froze. And then it stepped out of the shadows. Huge, covered in fur, with claws like something from a horror movie, and eyes that glittered in the moonlight, cold and hungry. That same nasty smell from the clearing hit us again, wave of pure terror. We were locked in place, eyes glued to this monster, standing on two legs, like some twisted joke of a human. For a split second, before everything went to hell, I saw a fallen branch, sharp end sticking up. No thinking, just grab. I had to protect Sarah, had to try something. I charged at it, yelling, branch raised. The thing didn't even flinch. It moved so fast, swiped at me with a claw the size of my hand. I went flying, slammed into the ground, pain exploding in my side, winded, gasping. "We have to get out of here," Sarah screamed, fumbling for her phone. Dead signal. Of course, dead signal in the middle of nowhere. I somehow managed to get up, Sarah helping, and we stumbled away, leaving the branch behind. Every step was agony, my side burning, but we had to move. Behind us we could hear it stalking, slow, menacing. Each growl chipped away at what little hope we had left. We knew, clear as day, if we didn't run, we were dead. Pushing ourselves harder, we burst onto another trail and saw a hiker, headphones on. Totally oblivious, we yelled, screamed for help, but he didn't hear a thing. But the monster did. Its pursuit went into overdrive, faster, closer. Pure adrenaline now, survival mode. We ran, eyes scanning for anything, any chance. Then, through the trees, a forest ranger tower. That was it. Our only shot. Dragging each other, we stumbled, fell pushed on towards the tower, the growls behind us relentless. We reached the tower, practically collapsed at the base, relief washing over us when we saw a CB radio inside. Sarah scrambled with the channels, finally getting through to emergency services, voice shaking as she tried to explain. I could hear the creature, closer now, crashing through the undergrowth. No time. We bolted up the tower steps, slammed the door shut behind us, praying that being up high would buy us a minute. Below, we heard it circling the tower, frustrated, monstrous growls echoing, claws ripping at the wood. Then sirens, faint at first, but growing louder. Hope flared. Would they make it in time? Then, a helicopter beam sliced through the dark, spotlighting the creature just it started trying to climb the tower. Blinded, caught off guard, it dropped back down as armed figures poured into the clearing. We were airlifted out, Sarah and I, both messed up but alive. But all I could think about were the animals, the hiker who didn't hear us, anyone else who might cross paths with that thing. Our peaceful escape, our nature retreat, had turned into a nightmare, something ancient and evil hiding in plain sight. They caught it, eventually, this beast, but it was hushed up, government files, never spoken of again. Leaves you with this cold truth. Some things are beyond us, beyond understanding, and maybe best left that way. They said it was just a dare, something to brag about later. Undiscovered, never want to hesitate at taking up a dare, right? That's what I told myself when my childhood best friend, Liam, challenged me. His dare: spend a night in the infamous Blackwood cabin by Shadow Creek. Everyone in town knew the stories, whispers of unspeakable horrors from decades ago that clung to the place like shadows. We gathered some basic supplies, flashlights, snacks, and a thermos of Maya's homemade spiced apple cider. She insisted it was crucial for cabin vibes, and set off. This was supposed to be an experience, something we'd laugh about around campfires for years. As we hiked to the isolated spot, the setting sun painted the sky in fiery oranges and deep purples, reflecting off the still surface of Shadow Creek. It was beautiful, almost deceptively so. The cabin, draped in thick ivy and hidden under the sprawling branches of ancient pines, looked like it had been plucked straight out of a Gothic novel. Frozen in time, Liam had said. Creepy, I'd thought. Stepping inside, I actually felt a weird sense of relief wash over me. It wasn't menacing, not immediately, just dusty, abandoned. We chuckled, trying to shake off the lingering unease that had been buzzing under our skins since Liam first suggested this insane idea. See, nothing to be scared of, I'd said, maybe a little too loudly. We set up some battery-powered lanterns. Candles felt too glitchy, even for a haunted cabin, and rummaged through our backpacks for food. Maya's cider was amazing, warm and spicy, chasing away the evening chill. We talked, mostly about stupid school memories, embarrassing crushes, and the kind of silly trouble only teenagers manage to find. We were both secretly proud of ourselves for being bold enough to actually go through with this dare. Later, I must have drifted off. I woke up to a sound, something peculiar outside. Rubbing the sleep from my eyes, I told myself it was just an animal, a raccoon or something, doing its nocturnal thing. But there was something off, hazy, unnatural. Liam stirred beside me, but didn't fully wake up. I tried to ignore the prickling feeling at the back of my neck, chalking it up to leftover nerves. But then, metallic scraping noises drifted into the cabin, cutting through the quiet night. "Liam," I whispered urgently, nudging him. "Wake up. Seriously." What's up?" he mumbled, still half asleep. "I hear something outside," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Then it came again, louder this time, a definite scuffling, right outside the locked cabin door. Liam's eyes snapped open, wide with a sudden, sharp fear. We huddled together, backs against the wall. Uncertainty and a growing dread wrapping around us like icy fingers. Trying to sound braver than I felt, I pulled my pocket knife from my backpack. It was small, practically useless against whatever was making those noises. But it was something. I knew panic was our worst enemy, that fear could freeze us solid. The cabin door groaned, wood protesting under pressure. Then a splintering crack as the lock gave way. We held our breaths, hearts hammering against our ribs. A wrenching, stomach-churning smell flooded the cabin next, like rotting meat and sulfur, mixed with something else, something indescribably foul. Before we could even process what was happening, the door burst inwards, slamming against the wall. And then it was there. Indescribable. That's the only word that even comes close. Its body was twisted, disfigured, like something ripped apart and stitched back together wrong. Decomposing muscles bulged and strained under its unnatural movements. Jagged bone, like spines, jutted out from its hunched back. Sinewy, elongated limbs carried its grotesque form across the floor. Razor, sharp claws scraping against the wooden planks, leaving deep gouges with every step. The repugnant being's facie turned towards us. Dead, unfeeling eyes. Black pits in a skull-like head, locked onto us with an intensity that was too sharp, too focused to ignore. Liam let out a choked gasp, a sound that seemed to enrage the creature. Like a predator finally spotting its prey, it lunged. Ferocious, quick. I reacted without thinking, brandishing my pathetic pocket knife, like some kind of desperate idiot, trying to ward off a nightmare. We scrambled back, pressed against the cold cabin wall. I saw Liam fumble for his phone, trying to call for help, but one of those nightmarish appendages shot out, swatting the phone from his hand. It skittered across the floor and disappeared into the shadows. Moments later, the claws swiped again, this time connecting with Liam's arm. He cried out as a brutal gash tore through his jacket and into his flesh. Adrenaline surged through me. I lunged forward, slashing wildly at the creature's grotesque face with my knife, hoping, praying, to drive it back, to make it stop. What followed was a chaotic, terrifying dance, human desperation against depraved monstrosity. It fought with a savage, unnatural strength, like something born to kill. The torment escalated as Liam stumbled backwards, closer and closer to the dying embers of the fire we'd lit earlier. His face was contorted with pain, screams muffled through gritted teeth. He was pleading for something, relief, help, something that wasn't coming fast enough. In a split second, a desperate, terrible idea formed. I made the decision. I shoved Lam towards the fire, hoping, praying again, that the flames would scare the abomination away. His terrified shriek as he fell startled the creature, just for a precious few seconds. Enough time. Liam, run. Out the back door. Call for help. I yelled, my voice cracking. Liam scrambled to his feet and bolted. I knew the phone signal out here was practically non-existent, weak at best. It could take him forever to find help, if help was even out there. But maybe, just maybe, he'd find someone nearby, another hiker, another cabin, someone who could help. Barely holding back my own terror, I turned back to face the creature. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the pocket knife, but I held on tight. Scanning the cabin desperately, I looked for anything that could be used as a real weapon. The creature's claws ripped through a nearby wooden chair like it was paper, emphasizing just how useless my little knife was. I needed something substantial. Spotting a heavy iron poker leaning against the fireplace, I snatched it up, putting as much distance as I could between myself and the monster. It lunged again, missing me by inches as I dodged away, stumbling back against the wall. My breath came in ragged gasps of sheer panic. This was it. This was a fight for survival. It snarled, a sound filled with audible malice, as we circled each other, each waiting for an opening. The creature lunged again. This time, as its deadly claws swiped, I swung the iron poker with every ounce of strength I had left. The poker connected with a sickening crunch. Momentarily, just for a heartbeat, the vile monstrosity's attack faltered. A surge of desperate hope flared in my chest, but then it recovered, its lifeless eyes locking back onto me. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to run, to follow Lime, to get out of this nightmare. But deep down, I knew I couldn't leave him. Not like this. With one final, desperate strike, fueled by adrenaline and pure terror, I swung the poker again, aiming for that grotesque head. To my utter disbelief, it connected, with such force that the creature's head snapped back, and its limp body toppled to the floor. Unmoving, I stood there, frozen, in stunned disbelief. For a moment, I couldn't even register that it was gone. Vanished. My heart pounded like a drum solo in my ears. Could it be over? Could this nightmare actually be finished? Moments later, the cabin door burst open again. This time, Liam stumbled in, followed by a park ranger in uniform. His face was a mask of shock. He could barely believe what he was seeing. He cautiously approached the creature, lying lifeless on the cabin floor, then radioed for backup, for medical assistance. Liam and I clung to each other, shaking, bruised, and terrified, but alive. We had survived. Against all odds, we had actually survived. In the days that followed, investigators swarmed the area, examining the creature's corpse, listening to our frantic accounts of what had happened that night. Local experts were baffled, completely unable to identify what kind of beast had invaded our peaceful getaway and nearly ended us. Life, somehow, started to move forward again. Liam and I slowly, surely, began to heal. The nightmare we endured would forever be etched into our memories. A dark, indelible mark. But so too would be our instinctive choice to fight, to protect each other, to not give in to the terror. We became, in a strange way, a testament to human resilience, to the enduring power of hope and determination, even when staring into the face of indescribable horror. With every day that passed since that nightmarish encounter, we grew stronger, reminded that even in the darkest times, there's always a flicker of light, a chance to make it through. My name is Ethan Blackwood, and the day I moved into the cabin in the Redwood National Park of Northern California was a decision etched in my memory forever. The rustic charm of the place was exactly what I needed: peace and quiet, something I'd been craving after a soul-crushing career in corporate law. My neighbor down the winding dirt road was a seasoned local named Jed. He welcomed me to the area with a warm smile, a jar of homemade blackberry jam, and a handful of tales about the ancient woods surrounding us. Jed was a generous soul with a booming laugh that followed every one of his folksy jokes. Initially, my days were filled with an almost unreal serenity. The gentle cooing of doves and the whispering wind through the towering redwoods created a natural symphony that lulled me to sleep each night. Little did I know, this tranquility was about to be shattered. One evening, just as dusk began to settle, a frantic knock echoed on my cabin door. It was Jed, breathless as if he'd sprinted all the way from his property. "Ethan, you gotta see this," he gasped, struggling to catch his breath. Jed led me back to his place, where a gruesome scene awaited us. His old hound dog Buster lay still in the yard. But it was the sight around him that made my stomach churn. Buster's insides were scattered across the blood-soaked grass, a sickeningly sweet stench rising from his mangled body. "What in God's name?" I choked out, staring at the carnage. Jed just shook his head, his face pale. "Never seen anything like it. Looks like some kind of animal attack, but different." We cleaned up the horrific remains of Jed's beloved Buster and buried him under a giant redwood in his backyard. As weeks turned into months, whispers of bizarre incidents started to ripple through the small, scattered communities around us. Stories circulated of deer found ripped apart, their deaths defying any normal explanation. Wildlife attacks were common enough in these parts, but this was something else entirely. A heavy unease settled over our little community, growing thicker with each new disturbing report. Yet life, in its stubborn way, went on. Late one afternoon, while walking back from a quiet fishing spot by the Eel River, I felt a sudden, unsettling shift in the air. Goosebumps erupted on my arms, and an involuntary shiver ran down my spine. "Do you smell that?" Jed murmured, having joined me for an afternoon stroll. "Smells like death." The stench grew stronger, acrid and cloying, as the forest around us fell into an unnatural silence. It was as if every living creature had vanished, holding its breath. Rounding a bend near my cabin, we froze, confronted by an unimaginable horror. Scattered across a small clearing were the dismembered remains of human bodies. Bone fragments glinted in the fading sunlight. Jed gagged, stumbling towards a thicket of ferns as my own legs threatened to buckle beneath me. Fighting back the nausea, I forced myself to examine the gruesome scene, desperately hoping not to recognize anyone. But it was nearly impossible. The bodies were violated. Whatever had done this possessed a savage, insatiable hunger for destruction. We knew, in that moment, that something had to be done, anything, before this unknown menace found us helpless in our own homes. We agreed to alert the local sheriff's department and to patrol our properties, armed, ready to confront whatever lurked in the shadows if it dared to come back for more. Every single day after that horrifying encounter felt heavier than the last. The sun seemed to struggle to break through the oppressive cloud, cover the hung over us like a shroud of doom. Tension and fear became a constant companion, reaching a fever pitch when we discovered ominous, dark tracks near the edge of the woods. Tracks unlike anything either of us had ever seen or heard of. Sleep became a luxury none of us could afford. Our eyes were always wide open, hearts pounding at every rustle outside our windows. Tonight was no different. Jed and I kept watch in his living room, our shotguns resting within easy reach. Distant coyote howls pierced the deafening silence of the night. We should split up, Jed suggested after a particularly long, unnerving silence. Cover more ground. Keep an eye on each other's places. I hesitated for a moment, the idea of being alone in the darkness amplifying my dread. But I also felt a strange sense of powerlessness against the creeping apathy and exhaustion that threatened to consume me. We both knew that to succumb to this fear was to slowly wither away, but we could no longer bear to cower from whatever hunted us. With a grim nod, Jed and I separated, heading back to our respective cabins. Communication became our lifeline as we patrolled our properties. We'd picked up walkie-talkies to stay connected despite the distance between our homes. Later that evening, static crackled through my walkie-talkie. I pressed the button to respond when something immense exploded from the tree line, charging towards me with terrifying speed. Despite its monstrous, grotesque appearance, a nightmarish fusion of animal and human, I could still glimpse distorted, almost recognizable facial features, hinting at a twisted humanity within its monstrous form. My heart hammered against my ribs as I fumbled for my shotgun, but the creature swatted it from my hands before I could even aim. Though momentarily stunned, I snatched up the walkie-talkie, my voice shaking as I yelled for Jed, telling him the creature was at my cabin. Scrambling backward, I heard Jed's voice crackle back, saying he was on his way, but urging me to try and escape first while he called for backup. As if understanding our desperate exchange, the creature unleashed a guttural snarl and lunged again. I dodged its attack, just barely, only for it to spin around with unnatural speed and slash at me with razor-sharp claws. Pain ripped through my arm as deep gashes opened up. Suddenly, the roar of a shotgun echoed through the trees. Jed had arrived, just in the nick of time. The beast roared in pain, staggering backward, and then retreated into the forest, leaving a trail of dark blood that showed at least some of Jed's shots had hit their mark. With a shaky sigh of relief, we bandaged my wounds and collapsed in my living room to try and catch our breath. It wasn't long before the distant wail of sirens grew louder, closer. The sheriff's department had finally arrived. After recounting our terrifying encounter with the monstrous being and leading them to the scene of the attack, the officers admitted they were dealing with something beyond their understanding, something neither human nor animal. But they promised to commit every resource to capturing and containing it. With round-the-clock patrols and the presence of law enforcement, we managed to sleep with a sliver more ease. But we both knew that this fragile peace wouldn't last. The creature was wounded, but far from defeated. Jed and I made the difficult decision to evacuate the area while the manhunt intensified. Upon leaving our cabins, we received grim news from the authorities. They had discovered a disfigured body deep in the woods. It was later identified as Jake, a local man who had been missing for weeks, and who we now suspected was one of the earlier victims we'd found in the clearing. Grief-stricken, we clung to the hope that no one else would suffer the same horrific fate. Days bled into weeks, but news about the creature remained scarce. Then, one morning, we received a call from the sheriff's department. They had successfully located and cornered the monster. Surprisingly, they found it dead in its lair, having succumbed to severe blood loss from the wounds it sustained during our confrontation. Despite the overwhelming relief that this terrifying chapter had finally closed, an undeniable sense of unease lingered. We couldn't forget Jake, or Buster, or any of the other victims whose lives had been brutally taken by this abomination. As we packed our belongings to return, a heavy silence hung between us. We couldn't help but reflect on the horrors we'd witnessed, the fear we'd endured, and the lives that were lost. We silently vowed to keep their memory alive, a bittersweet reminder of their sacrifice in our fight against that bloodthirsty monstrosity. My name is Jake Harrison, and I live in a secluded cabin deep within the misty Scottish Highlands. My little place is my sanctuary, a true escape from a world that feels like it's spinning faster and faster. We don't do family gatherings often, but everyone agreed it was time for one of our rare barbecues, a chance to catch up. But as my Aunt Carol droned on about her digestive issues, I felt that familiar pull to wander off into the woods. The afternoon sun filtered through the dense canopy above, casting a golden light that dappled the forest floor. Straying deeper into the wilderness here can be disorienting. A primal unease can creep in, but I know these trails like the back of my hand. I practically grew up exploring them. Then, a sharp snap echoed nearby, breaking the silence. My niece, Lily, always had a taste for adventure, and she practically worshipped my little expeditions, like they were something out of a storybook. Thinking she'd followed me, eager for her own adventure, I headed towards the sound, ready to play the role of guide. But as I pushed through the undergrowth, the source of the noise came into view, and my blood ran cold. It wasn't Lily. It was a sight so grotesque it felt like a punch to the gut. Human remains, sprawled out on the mossy ground. The body was clearly long gone, just bones and shreds of tattered clothing left. My heart hammered against my ribs, and I recoiled from the horror in front of me. This was way beyond any kid's idea of adventure. Suddenly, the thought of my family nearby snapped me back to reality. I had to tell someone. We might need help, the authorities. You know how family get-togethers are. Everyone disappears into their own little worlds of conversation. Finding anyone can be like searching for a ghost. After a frantic moment, I finally managed to flag down my perpetually tipsy Uncle Frank. I pulled him towards the woods, back to the gruesome discovery. We stopped at the edge of the trees, and I pointed. We just stared, a mix of disbelief and pure horror washing over us. Neither of us could have imagined stumbling upon something so sinister behind our barbecue. Days turned into a week, and the image wouldn't leave me. An unsettling feeling clung to me in my quiet cabin. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves seemed to whisper dark secrets. Friends started dropping by, wanting to talk about the macabre find. They'd retell local rumors, whispers that had circulated for years about some kind of predator haunting these very woods. One evening, I hosted another get-together at my place, trying to shake off the grim discovery. But a strange feeling of being watched started to creep over all of us. We were about to write it off as paranoia, fueled by the local gossip, when the living room window exploded inwards. Glass shattered everywhere. And then it was there, a figure, twisted and monstrous, stumbled through the broken window frame. Its skin was putrid, like rotting flesh stretched over an emaciated frame. Piercing red eyes locked onto us, burning into our deepest fears. A raspy cackle ripped through the silence of the woods, echoing off into the night. Then it lunged. Bony hands, fueled by some unholy hunger, reached for us. We scattered, a desperate, chaotic scramble to escape what felt like certain death. One by one, the creature cut us down with brutal speed. Soon, it was just me and my good friend, Mike, who works as an EMT. We dove into the basement, hearts pounding, adrenaline screaming through our veins. My hands, shaking, fumbled around the old shotgun I kept down there. 2 shells. Hardly adequate against that. But maybe enough for a fighting chance. Mike and I huddled in the basement corner, breaths shallow and ragged. Calling for help was impossible. The only phone was upstairs, abandoned when we fled. Going back for it meant facing that thing again. Fear paralyzed us. Moments stretched into an eternity, punctuated by the creature's ghastly movements above us. Screeching, hissing, it stalked the cottage, searching. The sound of its jagged nails, scraping against the wooden floors, sent shivers down my spine. I gripped the shotgun tighter. Motionless in the dim basement light, we clung to a sliver of hope, fear a cold tide washing over us. Then, the creaking started, footsteps approaching the basement door. Slow, deliberate, methodical. Like it was trying to lull us into a false sense of security, trick us into making a sound. Mike's eyes locked with mine, wide and terrified, like a deer caught in headlights, desperately trying to stifle any noise. The door hinges groaned as it slowly swung open. A silhouette filled the top of the stairs. Through my blurry, fear-filled vision, I saw it take the first terrifying step down. Each stair creaked softly under its weight, a sound that was both hushed and thunderous. "This is it," I whispered to Mike, as quietly as terror would allow. "When it gets close enough, I'll use the shotgun." But the consequences of a miss, or if the shells failed Mike, and I would share the fate of our friends. We held our breath, waiting, an eternity compressed into heartbeats as the hellish thing descended. Just as it reached the bottom stair, its head twisted, as if pinpointing our location. I aimed the shotgun at its rotting face and pulled the trigger. The deafening blast ripped through the basement. The creature was thrown back against the wall, a sickening spray of blood and necrotic tissue erupting from the impact. Frozen, hesitant to even breathe, Mike and I stared at each other, then at the fallen abomination. After a tense, silent count, it let out a wet, sickening groan and started to rise again. Dread flooded me. I knew I had to act now, before it could continue its onslaught. I pulled the trigger one last time. The shotgun roared again, and this time, the creature collapsed, flat on its back. Mike and I didn't waste another second. We scrambled up the basement stairs, stepping over the thing. We bolted from the cottage, leaving behind the ghosts of our friends. We ran until we collapsed at the doorstep of another house miles away. A stroke of luck. It belonged to an off-duty police officer. He listened, disbelief warring with concern on his face, as we frantically recounted the night's horrors. Within hours, police swarmed my devastated cottage. Mike and I watched from a distance as they cautiously dealt with what remained of the monstrous entity. Our friends were gone, victims of that horrific being. We missed their laughter, their kindness. We made a pact, Mike and I, to honor them through acts of goodwill, to keep their memory alive. Over time, the trauma faded, dulled but never truly gone. We were alive, at least. No one ever figured out where that creature came from, what it was, or how it ended up lurking in the woods behind my cottage. And truthfully, neither of us wanted to know. Dwelling on it wouldn't bring back those we'd lost, wouldn't erase the nightmares etched into our minds. Our lives would forever be marked by that night, side by side, until our last breaths. We vowed never to forget our fallen friends, lost to that animalistic monster in the Scottish woods. My name is Ricardo Silva, and I never considered myself superstitious until last spring. That's when a series of gruesome and inexplicable events turned my world upside down. I'd rented a secluded cabin deep in the Redwood National Park of California. I desperately needed an escape from my draining city life and sought peace in nature's embrace. Only 3 days into my retreat, the tranquility shattered. Police officers arrived at my doorstep, investigating a horrific murder that had occurred miles away. A hiker had been found brutally slain, their body mutilated beyond recognition, remains scattered across a wide area. The victim's distraught family had made the gruesome discovery near Lost Man Creek. It was an anomaly for this serene area, but the officer's reassurance that an arrest was imminent calmed my initial unease. As days turned into a week, and the disturbing incident began to recede from the forefront of my mind, I ventured deeper into the park's ancient, awe-inspiring, yet subtly unsettling wilderness. On one hike, far from marked trails, I stumbled upon a bizarre scene. Towering redwoods were splintered and ripped apart with savage force. The devastation stretched for yards, seemingly unnatural in its intensity. Intrigued and a little disturbed, I mentioned my discovery to a local store owner named Alina, while stocking up on some supplies in the nearby town of Oric. A flicker of fear crossed her weathered face. She leaned closer, whispering about forgotten tales of a malevolent entity, a dark legend most residents had dismissed as folklore. A shiver traced my spine, but I quickly rationalized it away as Alina continued her hushed narrative of a monstrous beast that had once terrorized these woods. Back at the cabin, the nights grew restless. Unidentifiable sounds clawed through the stillness of the Redwood Forest. The wind seemed to moan through the colossal trees, and rustling undergrowth fueled a growing unease. Was it just my imagination, or was something truly lurking in the shadows? Then came more terrifying news. 2 birdwatchers who had ventured deep into the very area I'd been exploring were now missing. Only their abandoned backpacks and scattered equipment were found, a chilling testament to their vanished presence. The reports of more victims in this once peaceful haven ignited panic throughout the community. Locals locked their doors, fearfully peering out windows. Even the staunchest skeptics couldn't deny the escalating dread. Suspicion and fear became palpable. The cabin's once welcoming walls now felt confining. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, a constant prickling sensation at the back of my neck. A sense of foreboding gnawed at me, urging me to confront my mounting terror before it consumed me entirely. Driven by a desperate need to quell my spiraling thoughts, I gathered my courage and stepped back into the woods. Armed with only a flashlight and a loaded handgun for a semblance of protection, I ventured into the deepening gloom. An eerie fog rolled in, tendrils snaking between the giant redwoods. Dry leaves crunched under each hesitant step. Adrenaline surged as every snap of a twig, every distant hoot of an owl, echoed unnaturally loud in the oppressive darkness. The hair on my nape prickled as an overpowering, nauseating stench assaulted my nostrils. What I saw in that dreadful clearing made the menacing shadows seem almost comforting. A vile monstrosity, both grotesque and primal, stood before me. It was perched on thick, muscular hind legs, easily towering over 8 feet tall. Its hunched body was a horror of ragged, matted fur and patches of raw, exposed flesh that seemed to throb with a sickening pulse. Its malformed head was barely recognizable as humanoid, a twisted mockery of a face. Rows of jagged teeth jutted from its elongated jaw, and bulbous, milky eyes stared blankly, emotionlessly into mine. This abhorrent spectre was the embodiment of inexplicable terror, the source of the dread gripping our community. Overcome by revulsion and primal fear, reality slammed into me with brutal force. The gruesome sight, the putrid stench, it was all too real. My trembling hands tightened their grip on the handgun. Mustering the last dregs of my resolve, I raised the weapon towards the horrifying apparition. I fought to stay calm, but the sight of this monstrous creature, dripping with a viscous mix of blood and saliva, paralyzed me. Its clawed feet scraped against the earth as it lumbered forward. Then, with shocking speed, it lunged. I reacted instinctively, pulling the trigger and letting out a strangled cry. The bullet struck its mark, but it barely seemed to register with the beast. It roared, a sound that ripped through the fog, choked forest, and charged again. I stumbled backward, desperately dodging its snapping jaws. The thought of calling for help flashed through my mind, but who would believe me? Even if someone came, could they possibly stop this formidable nightmare? Desperation clawed at me. I realized, with chilling certainty, that my only option was to run. The beast pursued relentlessly, its enraged snarls echoing behind me as we tore through the dark forest. My heart hammered against my ribs, fear lending me unnatural speed. The terrifying realization that I might not survive this encounter sank deep into my thoughts. The creature kept pace, a shadow of death at my heels. Then, my foot caught on a gnarled redwood root. I tripped, crashing to the ground with a jarring thud, the handgun flying from my grasp. The creature loomed over me, a silhouette against the fog, its fated breath washing over me as it prepared to end the chase. "Suther, allegate," I screamed, the words ripped from my lungs. To my utter astonishment, it recoiled momentarily, as if startled by the outburst. The brief hesitation gave me the precious seconds I needed to scramble back to my feet and snatch up the fallen weapon. My mind raced, desperately seeking any viable plan. I knew I couldn't defeat this monster alone. To stay and fight would be suicide, and risk drawing it closer to the town. Escape, regroup, warn others, that was the only logical course. I sprinted, adrenaline surging, pushing myself to the absolute limit, desperately trying to outrun the gruesome pursuer. Luck, against all odds, was on my side. I burst through the tree line and stumbled onto a paved road bordering the park. Cars streamed by in predictable patterns, a surreal reminder of normalcy in the midst of my nightmare. Summoning a final surge of fear-fueled energy, I stumbled onto the asphalt, frantically waving my arms, yelling for help. A semi-truck screeched to a halt, tires smoking, leaving black streaks on the road. The driver leaped out, his face etched with concern. "What's going on? What happened?" he demanded as I gasped for breath. Glancing back at the dark edge of the woods, for a moment, it seemed as if the creature had stopped at the tree line, unwilling to venture into the open. Perhaps it sensed the risk of leaving its shadowed lair. As I stammered out an explanation to the truck driver, desperately trying to piece together a semi-coherent story, an ominous howl echoed from within the forest, a chilling reminder that the beast was far from vanquished. But for now, at least, I had narrowly escaped. Together with the truck driver, my unwitting savior, I returned to town. I began spreading word of my horrific encounter, gathering a group of shocked survivors and brave volunteers. Our goal was clear. We had to hunt down this monstrous menace before it claimed more lives. We held a makeshift memorial for the lost hikers and the jogger, their faces burned into our consciousness. Then, armed with renewed determination and a grim unity, we marched back into the dark woods, ready to confront our living nightmare and end the terror gripping our community, one way or another.